This guy was a poor worker with a normal life. But his girlfriend betrayed him for being poor and talentless. She left him for a boy who was getting rich. But what she did not expect was that Lin wasn't exactly as poor as she was. Lin became a billionaire by discovering a system that allowed him to change jobs every week, winning large sums of money as well as luxury cars and property. His girlfriend's betrayal was not cause for rejection. In fact, it opened doors for him to meet new women who valued him and were even narrower with incredible curves. The story begins with Lin Ye being fired from his job, and apparently they didn't even give him a reason. Then calls his girlfriend Sissy Liu to try to deliver the news. But before I can say anything, she tells him that she wants to break up because Lin remains poor even after all the time they have spent together. She tells him that she no longer needs to come to his party, and that he should never call her again. As he enters the elevator on the worst day of his life, Lin notices suspicious blue light around him. Suddenly a beautiful woman, dressed like a maid, found it. Teacher saying he was his servant Lin Yui, and welcomed him to the full work experience system. You can basically try a new winery every week, and completing all the tasks will give you a final reward. Clearly in the clouds, thought it was finally time to stop being a complete no one as if to get. The new job was not enough. Also won an initial prize of 10 million and a Zonda Pigami, valued at 30 million when comments that he could be a driver for the rest of his life with such a car. She reminds him that I could only attempt one transaction per week. But apparently, Lin didn't care about that as he was making a lot of money. Then she takes the car key from him, saying that he needed to reclaim the Peninsula Hotel, and after giving the coordinates of the location of the car, she hands him the key. When you arrive at the garage, note to a beautiful woman in front of him named Chi Qingyang. Apparently Chi Ugly was having some problems with her car, and when he asks what happened to the lady there, she tells him what had happened. And he asks if she would like me to take her, and she clearly accepts. Suddenly the spoiled young man arrives, bugging her saying that I would take her since Lin seemed to be out of money. But apparently she had already rejected this young man a few times before and then rejected it again. Lin takes the matter into his own hands and says he will take care of taking her to where she needs her. So then she tells her stalker that she didn't care. Ride in a broken car. But let's just say they were both surprised suddenly when they saw the Pagani. 30 million what impressed the spoiled child. Finally Lin asks Miss G to get in the car, this time humiliating the car of the boy who was there. As they climb to the car the child spoiled, he asked to be taken for a walk. But she fell behind eating the Pagani powder herself. Impressed with her car, asks him if it was really his, since recently he was only an employee in the sales department, and he says yes, and that he was a rich child, that I was only there to experience what it was like to be poor. Then Lin asks you to start a trip in the application, blah blah blah, and becomes its first customer. And so it did. With the request made, he took her to the site, and finally says goodbye to its new private driver. Suddenly the girl from before appears in shape, miniature on his chest, congratulating him on completing his first task, rewarding him with 50 million, and he was impressed with the amount he received for completing just a trip at the hotel. Peninsula. Her ex was with her rich new boyfriend, wishing I had met him sooner. And suddenly he realizes that Lin was also there. When she saw him, she thought he had gone alone to win her back, but he made it very clear that he was only there to spend money. Then he decides call the security guards to kick him out, and to top it off, still insults him by calling him a beggar. But when they arrive, the security guards all prostrated themselves before him. Both her and her boyfriend, impressed by the authority he had over that place. And this only increases when one of the security guards calls him to the meeting room to report on their performance. Only then the snake realized that she had lost a rich man. In the meeting room, an employee enters saying that there was a customer who wanted to file a complaint against them, just for having rented a car that was already being used by some VIP users. With that he leaves his tears with them and decides to go to the place to talk to the girl. When she opens the door, he says he would solve his problem, and her name was Gu Jinshua, but I will only call her Jin. With that the protagonist asks if he would not like to paint your Pagani, but since he could not afford to invent supercars, so he says he didn't know how to drive such a car. With that he suggests taking her where she was going, and she ends up accepting, asking him to wait a little while he was getting ready. While she was preparing, he had a privileged view that few in life had, and was finally ready in the living room. Main the snake was playing her rich new boyfriend, and he finally realized what kind of woman she was. Sissy was bragging, thinking that Lin I would really forgive her, just because they had been together for so many years. Her friend started to get a little jealous of her, but she says he would take her for a ride in the Pagani later. But little did she know that Lin I was already in very good company, and Sissy approaches him as if nothing had happened by saying who would be in charge of his business from now on. With all the kindness in the world, Lin says it was none of his business who that girl was. And here the victim is asking if he didn't love her anymore, and even says that the girl next to him did not have such good skills as yours to manage your business. Then Jean joins the game and says that some time ago he had said that she was much better than his ex and takes the opportunity to add, who also had great flexibility, then decided to leave. His ex said she was willing to be even the second choice if he wanted to, but he tells her to leave among other things, and that it should not bother him anymore by leaving her on the ground, taking revenge for being humiliated on the phone. Inside the car she tells him where she was going and apologizes to annoy him, but it was not a nuisance, as she had also helped him with the problem. In El Hotel where she was going, her friends were complaining that she was late, and it seems that they did not believe that Jen. She really had a rich boyfriend, as she always said. Shortly thereafter, they arrive at their Big Annie, and his friends were impressed by her boyfriend's car. With that she says that I had helped her before and asks him to do the same for her now, and finally, Lin says goodbye to her as if he were really her boyfriend. In one part of the city, an elderly woman was complaining that Lin was 10 days late with the rent, and his daughter was trying to calm her down, while the old woman complained that she might run away. Someone came out knocking on the door, and when he opened it, it was Lin, who was there to say goodbye, as he left and had only come for him to pack his things. The lady then says he needed to pay what she owed before she left, already in turmoil. They owed $2,000 in rent but sent $4,000 to his account as compensation for the previous delay given that moved so suddenly. The landlady asked him if he had found anything new, and he said he was now a blah blah driver. On the way to her car, the elderly woman decided to follow him just to see if he had stolen anything from his house, and they encountered a beautiful Higini who was parked right in front of his residence. When she asks him where his old car was, he finally reveals that he was the owner of the Big Annie that was there, leaving her speechless for having become so rich so suddenly. And he simply says he stopped pretending, as I was just experiencing what it was like to be poor. When he left in a hurry, the girl began to think that I might have a chance with him, but his mother says that since it was not good enough when I was poor, now that he is rich he has no chance at the hotel that he was managing. His employees reserved for him a presidential suite, and finally got a good meal after so long without eating, then receives a message from his he asking him to pick her up since he had finished his work. 30 minutes later, he had gone to pick up the beautiful princess, and as soon as she gets in the car and asks if he would not like to place an order. A little confused by what he was talking about, she asks what type of order was, and he says it was the order of the application blah blah blah, otherwise I would not make money. Her realizing that he took herself seriously, this blah blah business, wonders how someone so dedicated could have been fired. She worked in the same company as he did but had a management position or something like that. Suddenly the girl from before appears, telling her not to worry because he could not see it. Then he says that the girl in his car was very beautiful, and the system gave it a score of 85 in addition to successfully completed the second application and received a new assignment, where he needed to transport 2 women with a score of 85 or more, in addition to other rewards. Lin then asks what type of woman is considered above 85 points, and she says it would be a woman like Miss Key. After that, the beautiful lady in her car asks him if he would not take her home, and it looked like he was having a moment more difficult than her. When he asks her if her problem was personal or business, she says it was business, as they needed to organize a launch event soon, and they had not yet been able to rent a hotel. When he tells her to go to the Peninsula Hotel, she thought she would have no chance of getting reservations in a hotel as incredible as that. Lin responds that this was not necessarily true. After all, life was full of surprises, and she told him praises for being so good with words, asking him to turn around to the car and out to the Peninsula Hotel. However, she says that if they did not get a deal would not pay for the change of route. And when he asks what would happen if I got the deal, she asks him what he would like as a reward, and he says he would have to make 10 swats in front of him. When he tells her to look for the type of swat on your phone, she realizes it was too embarrassing, but he soon remembers that he had already called to attempt to make a reservation, and the manager I had told him that nothing was available at the time. So your chances of winning were practically safe, and ended up accepting their proposal. At the hotel reception, she says he would like to talk to manager Wine, and the receptionist wonders if this was her boss's new mistress, pretending to be poor again, and that she was much more beautiful than the ex. In the lobby, the manager receives her, and she asks if they would have a hotel auditorium available for rent, and thanks to Lin's help, who was behind her running everything, manager says he could rent for any day she would like more. Beyond the moon, she thanks him and gives him the date she would like to. After that, his problem was solved, and Lin says now was the time to fulfill its promise, the bet they had made before, and asks him if he still remembered her. But still, as she was the president of the company, had to keep his promise, and he approaches her so she could do the squats. However, as they were still inside the car, she asks him if they couldn't go to your house and talk about it. And since it was very small and narrow there, it was better that they went to his house. He then accelerates to get there as fast as possible, leaving her in doubt as to why she was so appalled with that. Upon arriving at the house of the divine lady, she asks him if he would like to receive payment at that time, and he clearly replies that yes. Before starting, she says she has never done this kind of thing before. so he shouldn't complain if he wasn't doing it right, and finally begins his training. Apparently the protagonist, I was enjoying every second. But unfortunately, he only had time to make one since his father suddenly appeared asking what he was doing, his daughter, leaving them both completely speechless. After that sudden appearance, Miss B, all embarrassed, she asks what her father was doing there and says that Lin was actually his new yoga instructor. Apparently his father did not swallow, since no instructor simply stays watching without doing the movements together. And she says he was actually an advanced instructor only for verbal guide. The old man then sits next to Lin this time and asked him what his name was and what he did, and Lin says he was a blah blah driver, but sports car driver, leaving the elderly man in doubt as to which car had to have made his daughter get into his car. When he realizes that it was the Pagani that was parked in front of the parking lot outside, their treatment of Lin changed overnight, saying that he could now entrust her with his daughter, but she says they didn't have that kind of relationship. Then his father says they could go to the governor's birthday together of the family and asks him to continue his fun, finally leaving the two of them alone. The divine lady says her father had misinterpreted the situation, and the protagonist takes an action that honestly impressed me, showing that he was not there to play, telling them to continue from where they had left off. He set aside before the situation becomes more delicate, but he was only referring to the exercises from before, while she was thinking about educational activities. Then receives a message on his cell phone of people of the former company, where he ended up inviting him to dinner at our restaurant that same night and bids farewell to Ms. He, saying that they would continue from where they left off later. Upon the arrival of a woman who was apparently the highest ranking, there he asked him to sit, and began to praise him too much. The real reason for this invitation was actually to make him jealous, as one of the employees there had just received a promotion to chief of the sales department, and the theory of Lin was completely correct. Suddenly a restaurant employee asks who's Pagani who was downstairs, and while Lin I was asking what had happened to the pagan kids who would never have a car like that in their lives, were impressed with the machine. The employee then says he was blocking other cars, so he asked the owner to move the car from where I was. When one of the employees of the former Lin company tells him to calm down a little, Lin reveals that the Pagani was actually his. With that he quickly put in his place the one who was only there for humiliate him, and says goodbye to the girl who had invited him, saying that he would take food home to eat. After that the scorpion from before apologizes to Lin, asking him to stay a little longer, but Lin rejects her, as there was no reason to accept the request for forgiveness. Miss Jin ended up accompanying him back home, and he asks her if she would not like to place an order so that he could complete his task again. She clearly accepts her application, but his total score was only 84 points, not meeting the requirements necessary to complete the task. For him the score was wrong, and he asks if they knew some way to increase the charm of women. She takes a garment out of her bag to put on, improving his appearance a bit, and asks what he thought, already thinking he wanted something. After the new skin she obtained 85 points, and he scored 1. Villa and Kyoshu therefore needed meet with a sales manager to receive your reward. After that she asks him if he would not like to upload to speak better, since her husband was on a business trip that day, but Lin politely rejects his offer despite his desire to accept it, and finally say goodbye. The next day he goes to the Kyoshu sales department to receive your reward, and an employee who was a former his colleague asked him what he was doing there. Responds that he had gone to receive a deed of his property. But since she couldn't believe him, begins to push him until superior of his asks what I was doing. The manager orders him to leave immediately. Then she offered to show the property to the protagonist, but the girl in my center. Before that, he still insisted that he could not afford none of the villas that the manager had, then orders him to go to human resources, as she has just been fired, saying I never wanted to see her there again, for lying so much. However, the girl says it was not a lie, and who knew everything about him. But in fact that's what I thought. Jacqueline had bought 9 villas in Kyoshu alone, and the girl realized that he no longer knew his former classmate. Even the protagonist was impressed by this news. The manager apologizes from what you said before, but says it was fine. After all, she had already fired the previous employee. After a while with the formalities done, he asked you to hand over the deeds of his properties, and so it did, together with all the keys. Receive news from Miss Jin that the 2 types from before, who tried to humiliate him in the restaurant, were dismissed. Then send him a message, asking her if she had anything to do with it, and she reveals that he investigated the reason for his dismissal and fired them both immediately because of this. After talking a little she asks him to pick her up in the office as his car was still under repair. After this he receives a new task, where I needed to get 5-star reviews to receive a new reward. At the end of the day he asks Miss Jean I don't understand, it's stars, and she says she would change the quotes down the 5-star slope then. However, he advances rapidly, saying he didn't want 5 stars if she wasn't going to do the squats, so I wanted him to make the remaining 9. After that, finally she gets out of the vehicle and Miss Jin realizes that he has just left of the protagonist's car. Then he tries, "I would like an excuse." Suddenly, even though she had not even asked nothing before, Jin then begins to think I wouldn't stand a chance with him, as he is apparently interested in Miss G. Still thinks this, although the brain cells are married for this topic. Definitely stayed in the hospital. The divine lady then calls Jin, so that they can return to work, but not before leaving. A 5-star review for our protagonist. We continue with Lin, accepting a new trip in the blah blah application. But before arriving at the site, the client asked him to pretend be her boyfriend, and clearly accepted the young woman's request. Upon arrival at the site, met a beautiful lady, and her name was Yu. A streamer, famous, and let's say she was also delighted with him. The parents of Yu arrived to meet the young protagonist. But when he says he was a blah blah driver, their reactions clearly did not show approval. The little damsel even tries to explain to his parents that being a blah blah driver has been very profitable lately, but they still don't believe him very much. Before this situation got worse, I rushed his parents to go to the party, but Lin's car only had capacity for 2 people. So they would have to go in another car. While they were going to Lin's car, clearly thought that their daughter had gotten a boyfriend. Terrible. That was until they saw the Piggy parked outside and Lin asks the beautiful damsel to get on his machine. When his parents saw that Lin actually had a lot of money, their expressions and their actions completely change. On the way to where she was on her way to ask if it would be a problem if there would be a live broadcast inside his car, but he lets her be comfortable, and in return, would like me to give you the 5 stars after this tour. In its live broadcast, people thought I had done some kind of trick education in order to be able to I need such a car, but she clarifies that he was a blah blah driver. However, in his thoughts, she said that if he was willing to pay for her, I didn't think she would play the hard part. I imagine you have already received the message here. At the end of the trip, she gave him the previously promised 5 stars. And the rabbit from before appears in an unusual place this time, rewarding him for completing his goal. 5-star preview of the. After that, he asked Yu if he knew the place well, as he needed to change his cell phone, and she decides to help him with his problem. With that, they go to the Apple store, bite, and when you choose one that you would like to buy, she says they could buy a cell phone, much cheaper, online, but he does not see the need to do so. When the seller returns to deliver the cell phone to Lin, offers another case to give more protection to the cell phone. But since he didn't like to use cases, responds that his intention was actually to purchase a few more cell phones, so if one breaks, it simply replaces it with another. When he says he would like 5 units of each color, and also a MacBook, Yu realizes the absurd amount of money he had, and in its live broadcast, things as well were going very well since people love to see that kind of thing. Leaving the store, the beautiful lady asks if she would like to go somewhere else to buy a few more things, and he decides to go to a watch store this time, but he was, of course, the saleswoman in this store was a little, as he judged a book by its cover just because the girl was a streamer, then chose a watch to wear. But the saleswoman was not very good to it and said that the display models, they could only be shown if payment had been made in advance, which does not make much sense, as we first need to see something up close to be able to buy it all of a sudden from another customer. Rides with his companion, and it was clear that the difference in the deal here is absurdly great. And when the passenger of the Simplonia is interested in one of the watches, the saleswoman bitterly wore the watch to show it up close. With that, Lin was outraged for the absurd difference in his treatment of the simpleton, feeling completely despised in that store. However, she responds that his service was equivalent to the level of its customers, so I expected your understanding. Clearly he was even more angry, especially because she was nothing more than a snake that only one book judged by its cover, and in the end he decides to go to another store. The competing store were very well received, unlike the previous store. Lin, as I did not have a lot of experience in this area, asked you for help, for her to help him choose something, but she wasn't very. People are familiar with this price level. In its transmission live, he was told to purchase a watch from the collection anniversary, and then Lin did what people said and asked for the collection watch anniversary. They had attention, all attendees there, completely impressed with his attitude. When Lin asked if this would not be possible, she says it would clearly be possible. But since that clock was not in stock, because it was a limited edition, they would need to ask for it, and she herself would deliver it to her home when you were ready. When you ask if they didn't have that watch in such a large store, one of the attendees says there were only 6 of those watches in the world, so I wasn't even in that country. With all this fuss, people in the Viper's store were recorded to see who had bought the 10 million watch, but upon arrival at the store, realizes that who had bought it was precisely the boy whom she had just belittled, and had the and daring to still to call him to take a look at his store. But when she said he was too poor for your store level, he even refused kindly your offer, leaving it on the ground, completely repentant of her previous attitude. As he leaves the store, he apologizes to you for having made it accompany him throughout his journey, and gives him a new phone number as a reward and apologies. And finally she thanks him, and they finally say goodbye. After his last race, Lena had gone to a racetrack to receive her reward. Upon arrival at the reception, the girl says they had received a reception tip that day, so they were closed to the public. Sin embargo, Lin says he was not there to play, but to see the manager and ask him to help him with that. Suddenly a young man named Kim Hun comes in asking why the protagonist was there, as I had booked the whole place. Only for him, the assistant apologizes by saying that the young man was only there to talk to the manager, while her twin sister took Lin to her destination. Then asked who was the guy who had rented the entire racetrack, and the assistant says he was and that there were not many people to dare to mess with him. In the manager's office was clearly very well received, and the manager reveals to everyone there that Leah was now the owner of his racetrack. So from now on he was the boss there. After that, the manager takes Lin to take a walk around the racetrack and introduces him to better the place of which he was now the owner, and asks him if our protagonist would like to go for a walk on the racetrack, and Lin ends up accepting her generous offer to Kim. Did not like that the manager took people there, as he had reserved the whole place just for himself. But the manager soon clarifies to the young man that he was actually the only owner of the place where they were. Lin asks the manager to get those outsiders out of there. After all, I had desire to go for a few laps on the racetrack, and I could even give him back his money, if necessary. As no one had ever had the courage to treat Kim in this way, suggests a race to our protagonist, saying that whoever won could stay in the place. After Lin end up accepting your offer, is curious to see which is Lin's car, saying he could even change cars, if necessary, if he thought his car was too powerful. However, Wund sees that he was a pagan, and Probe is completely speechless, and finally prepared to survive. But in the end, there wasn't much of a chance for Kim, as Lin ended up winning the race easily between them, thus earning the respect and admiration of the famous young man, who even asked to follow Lin. On social networks, Kim then asks some tips about what he might have done to improve his start at the beginning of the race, and Lin gave him some information to improve a little bit. Lin received a new career application shortly after in his app blah blah, and tells the manager that he had to leave so that Kim could stay there, and it would be free. The young man then asks what kind of work he had, since it had so much in a hurry to leave, and to say that he was a blah blah driver. Left the young man completely speechless when he heard that. At the place where he would pick up his transportation, we see the divine lady that not even had finished painting for his suitor. And let's just say he didn't care much. She then goes straight to the point and asks him to wait for her, and tells him to go play or to do something else while she finishes getting ready. When he sits down to use the computer, says there was a new mail for her and her, thinking it was about some kind of business document or something like that, ended up letting it pass, but when to realize that it was actually a clothing I had bought earlier on the internet, quickly returns so that he does not see her, although it was too late. At one point she dies, slipping and almost falling, and when he tries to help her so that she does not get hurt, let's say he won, having a view quite privileged what I have been doing to get red juice from the nostrils due to strong emotion. With all this shame, she leaves all embarrassed and soon after returns, all dressed up, asking how she looked in that new outfit. If she could make a comment now, would be that this outfit showed that his health was completely in order. But since I can't comment on anything, I'll just be silent about it. Lin responds that this new outfit was suitable for beauty pageants, and even more suitable to do the squats that it owed to him. Then tells him not to worry, since he had not forgotten the squats that owed him, and asks him to close more gauges so that you can pay off your debt. And finally, the atmosphere was fully prepared for activities, more educational physicalities that anyone has ever seen. However, as it clearly cannot show it here, we will have to settle for only this preparation of it, although it didn't really happen much. After fulfilling his promise, she rushes him so they can go to an exchange program, where she had to go, but let's say he got excited too much and had to go to the bathroom quickly. Half an hour later, returns happy as a worm. All relieved, I imagine that some may have already realized why he decided to go away for a while. After all, the eyesight I had was enough to leave anyone speechless, if you know what I mean. Suddenly, as they left, the parents of the divine appear, and as they did not want interrupting the couple, his father asks if they had already finished. Yet she went crazy, asking what I was talking about. Old Tate says it had arrived there a long time ago, but as they saw the closed stairs, did not dare to enter so as not to disturb them. And even his mother joined the conversation, also saying that he had nothing to be ashamed of, as it was a necessity, normal daily. Before leaving and leaving them for her engagement, the mother of the lady calls to go to her grandmother's birthday party, which would take place 2 days later, and he ended up accepting his offer, while the divine lady was all embarrassed deep down. When he finally takes him his commitment, asks him not to complain, give it the 5 stars, and tells him to order back as well, that he would come running to pick her up. She apparently was a little jealous of him, and tells him that she probably always received good reviews from its customers, and let's just say I couldn't stop that from happening. Finally say goodbye, and he tells her to contact him if you need anything. After that, the girl, dressed like an old rabbit, was now dressed as a cheerleader, congratulating him on completing another task. and as a reward this time he obtained 21% of the company's assets, blah blah blah, becoming now one of the executive directors of blah blah, just for having made a few deliveries. Then she said that the place where the headquarters was located, of blah blah, had an estimated value of as 500 million, and if it sold, its participation in the company could easily earn a profit of at least 10 billion. However, as this one is intelligent, decided to keep his shares and win a few hundred million in dividends each year, by saying that he had completed 55% of his career, and that he could receive an even more generous reward. When he reached 100% he was thrilled, even more, to move forward with his life as a blah blah driver, or at least that's what happened, as it would soon have to, dealing with a customer who would drive him crazy. Parking the car next to her, he asks if she was the person I had come looking for, and she replies that yes, thinking he had dressed so well, that even the rich boy had been interested in her. Already inside the car, she asks where she would like to take her, saying that he was not a very easy person to please, and he asks her if she wasn't the one who placed the order in blah blah. She, outraged that he was an application driver, did not believe his words, and he says that in reality, this was the company's new service, a luxury version so to speak. His disappointment was so great, who ended up showing his other face to him, thinking that I had actually found a rich man. Along the way she ended up putting our protagonist completely nervous, and for revenge, he put her through some pretty good situations, complicated and embarrassing, I would say, and he tells him to get out of his car, as if tormenting his life before had not been enough. He also says it would leave a bad look on the application, and that he would also call to complain about him. On leaving there, receives a call from the regional people of blah blah, who gives him a good reprimand for having acted in this way with a customer, saying that he would be deducted from his deposit if it happened again later. Lin returns the complaint saying that he could discount it if he wanted to, and did not like Lin's answer, says it would suspend its operational orbit. When Lin asks if he had ever stopped to think in the consequences of suspending his presidency, it was checkmate to simply tell Lin to wait for the suspension, hanging up the phone in the most rude manner. After that, Lin had gone to visit his villas in Kyushu, or at least I think that's what happened, and was very well received upon arrival there. In a moment the young man who was said he had hired some housewives and would like to introduce them to you, and Lin decides to accompany him to the place where they were. However, upon arriving there, let's say you find precisely to the girl from before that he thought he was the Neville of the world. The manager then saw the way he treated Lin. Understand your employee with that. Lin ask why he was there, and if it was for me to work as an employee, domestic or something like that. Then she responds rudely, saying that it was none of his business, and that a driver from blah 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 I should never be there. With this attitude on his part, the manager slaps the snake in the face, asking him how he dared to speak to the owner of the court of Kyushu in that way. Apparently the manager was his cousin, and still insisted that there was no so that he could be the owner of the place, since he was a simple employee of blah blah. The manager then tells him to apologize to Lin, and only then did he realize that he really owned the place. And with that finally, decides to put aside his pride, and apologizes, with him asking for another chance. However, it was already too late, and Lin says she had horrible breath, so Lin asked the security guards to get her out of there. And clearly they did. After getting rid of the undesirables in society, the manager finally presents at 4 o'clock housewives who had prepared for Lin. Seeing that they did not seem very happy, tells them to let everyone come back and I would reimburse them 5,000 each for travel expenses. After that, receive a message from the divine lady, who was already ready to order to pick it up. And finally we asked his manager to look for more domestic employees for him. In the place where the lady was, divine her friend asked her to not to leave still and to stay for a second round. And a young man named Jim asked him the same question as well, saying that he would take her home later. But since Mr. was very busy with the work, had to leave, and had already asked her driver to pick her up as well, and finally talking about him, arrives at the establishment to pick up his beautiful lady. But apparently the young man did not like to see this scene, as gray boiled inside. His friend said that Lin was very handsome and could even be a model or something like that. With that the child, spoiled and carefree, says it didn't make sense to be handsome, since he was only the driver of blah blah, and then asks what was wrong with that. The young man says he thought that I was very lucky to meet Miss D. Then the young man says that his friend was not very intelligent, because although he was a driver, still had a sense of superiority, and since she did not like what she had just said, the young man defends it, saying that he really had to have that sense of superiority. The girl who accompanied the young man then says that his partner had bought a Mercedes, and the protagonist never in his life he could save money to buy such a car. After this embarrassing scene, the divine lady tells him not to pay much attention to them, since they had drunk too much, and asks them to leave immediately, and call the brat completely outraged, because she had defended Lin right in front of him. In paradise the brat was bragging about his little car, bragging too much, even saying that he would buy a Lamborghini, when the divine lady became rich. Comments that he remembered his favorite car in college was a Zonda Pagani. And he says that for the value of the Pagani, even if he worked all his life, I could never buy one. Someday talking about the Pagani, his friend noticed that, but there was one, parked right next to his car, and goes to see the car of his dreams, that was right in front of him. After a while, the protagonist asks if he had already finished looking, and the boy thought that he actually wanted to see it too. However, when our protagonist asks his divine lady to get into his car, ended up with their mouths open, especially realizing that this beautiful car is actually belonged to a simple blah blah driver, and finally, he leaves the presence of people toxic to their beautiful lady. Inside the car, the lady apologizes with him by his colleague, says I did not imagine that they would be so snobs, but he didn't care a lot and asked him if he would like me to take her home. However, as I had drunk a little, would like to go to the beach to clear his head, even saying that it would even change destiny. But he lets it go, since it did not hurt, change the route for some fresh air. His new task was to obtain 10 5-star models, and with that would be his 7th positive confirmation, and finally arrive at the beach. Then she asked him to turn around to the other side to be able to take off there. But he thought he would do something else though. Let's say that at the beginning he refused to turn around, and she felt forced to pinch him so that he would not look at her. Why, friends, I don't think I need to comment on this image. An unparalleled beauty in the manuals, and also, I think this was the character most beautiful I have seen so far. Finally, Chiwon. I was ready to go for a walk on the beach, and comments that his parents continue to insist that he go to his grandmother's birthday party. When I was about to ask something he had already anticipated his question and asks him if he would like him to pretend be her boyfriend, and just after that he accepts, saying that he could take care of that for her since I had worked so hard in the squats before. When he saw the lights of the Kyushu pavilion on, was quite impressed, since, due to its extremely high price, the pavilion had never been sold before, therefore, was the first time I had seen it all lit up at night. And Lin said he would drive a little closer to show you the place, and he even said that if he liked, I could sleep there if I wanted to. We continue with Maseski, thinking it would be a dream to sleep at the residence of Kyushu, and with that the protagonist decided to show him a few more things. Upon arriving at the entrance, she mentions that it participated in the bidding process for the land at first, although the result was later annulled. However, as she was also president of a company, he said she didn't need to feel envious. But she tries to disguise it by saying that the indoor pool used mineral water transported by air, and that's why I actually had pants. Lin holding her hand, saying that I would show him what he looked like on the inside then. Since I wanted to see, afraid of being caught, she settled for only observing from the outside. But the protagonist asks him what she would gain if she actually got her into it, says it would wear a bikini and it would make a great show for him, which honestly only increased his motivation even more in order to obtain your reward. Enter the pavilion of Kyushu. Admire for how easy it was to enter, even wondered where the security at the site was, as it was supposed to be the highest level of security around. When she enters, she notices a fruit tree nearby, and to approach even more he asks her if he would like to pick up some fruit, but she softly refuses. When he sees the pool, he is impressed by its beauty, and since they managed to see the pool, it was time for Maseski to fulfill his promise, or at least it would be if I had a bikini with her, and knew swimming also, so it was better that they talked about it later. With no options to refuse, she ended up accepting what she said, and she says she would keep his word and would return there so that she could pay him. In a moment he asks if she wouldn't want to take a look inside the house. But since I was already afraid of being caught, thought it was better to stay there. But since there was no one in the village, he tells her not to be afraid and to enter. After that, his surprise was huge when he knocked on the door and was welcomed into his home, only then revealing that the house was really his all the time. What only made it scold him for cheating on her all this time. While admiring the interior of the house, she also how much he had spent there, and he replies that he had spent a few billion. Thinking he was trying to cheat on her again, she says that the most expensive villa there only cost 1.2 billion, unless he had bought the entire Kyushu pavilion, and finally reveals that he had indeed bought it. As I have never seen anything like this before, she asks if by any chance I had some kind of money tree. But since he could not reveal anything about the system, he had decided to remain silent, even though that was easier than having a real money tree. Now more comfortable, decides to sit on the comfortable and luxurious sofa in the residence. With that he says he would not take her home so late at night. Therefore she could choose one of the rooms to stay, and ends up accepting the protagonist's generous offer. When he asks if he had women's pajamas there, obviously answers no, because it wouldn't make much sense if they had. However, he says no. I would watch so she could sleep, as it felt more comfortable. What happened by making her feel even more ashamed, he decided to go upstairs to see if he had any pajamas for her. While she was in the shower, ended up slipping and asked him to come in for a moment, because it had fallen. Worried about her, he asks if Masas had been injured. And to your surprise, when he enters the bathroom, she says that she injured his ankle and asks him for help showering like that. Protagonist does not beat around the bush. I imagine you have already figured out what kind of support he gave him. To be honest, I think he's really screwed up. Now if you know what I mean. The next morning, she wakes him up in a hurry, as he would be late if he decides to sleep more, and she says that if he got up early and took her to work I would give 5 stars. After leaving the lady Lin remembers that he had not eaten anything yet, so he decided to take a break for breakfast. Had clearly gone to the place he owned. But since he didn't want to disturb anything, he tells his manager, General, that it would be theirly without disclosing to employees who he really was. As soon as he enters, he calls a waitress to attend to him. And to your surprise, the waitress who came to serve him was precisely the manager who had fired him in Chapter 1. Then begins to humiliate the protagonist again, saying he never thought he would find scum like him there. Outraged by the treatment he received, begins to argue with her. And once again she begins to humiliate him by saying that if it weren't for the relationship he had with a rich woman, could never afford to eat there soon. One of the employees says it was better to stop saying those things. But the new manager completely ignored the girl's warning and continued saying things that should not be said to in order to prevent the situation from worse, orders the employee to go find the general manager. But the new manager continued with the humiliations without stopping until he asks her if she could not learn from her own mistake, saying that out of respect for a former colleague would still let it pass this mistake of hers. Then comes the general manager, and she tells him that he dies to the security guards to kick him out because he was poor and was trying to cause problems. However, the one that received a reprimand this time, it was her, and the manager says he owned the place. Therefore if someone should be expelled, it should be her, as she still did not believe what the manager had told her, says he must have been deceived in some way. Lin was his former co-worker, but apparently the one who had cheated on someone there was her, and he wonders how a person like her managed to pass on her interview. As if that wasn't enough, the manager says he would also blacklist her, which would completely end his career, as no company would hire her anymore. After all this show, security guards took her outside, confronting Lin for having acted in this way with him. After solving the problem with women, bitter the general manager apologizes by the monster with his boss's food. And the protagonist gladly accepts, only asking you to make a more detailed analysis next time I hire someone. After that he receives an unknown call on his cell phone, and when she answered it was the vice president, senior and blah blah named Tan. Ian would like to get to know him better, so I asked him when he might have time to talk. However, since they had a job in the morning, would contact her later. And with that she ends up agreeing to talk to him later. When his assistant asks him if Lin had accepted to meet with her, the vice president says what he had said. Therefore she was going to visit one of her colleagues. That morning when he heard the objectives of his superior, his assistant decides to call the driver to take him to the scene. To her surprise she knew little that this driver would be precisely the one I had been looking for all this time. Then receive a travel request in your application, and clearly decides to accept her as she was very close to him. Upon arriving there you will find with the vice president and her assistant, and when asked if she was Mrs. Tien that the driver had requested it, she replied that yes. But in his thoughts he admired clearly the beauty of our protagonist. When Lin calls her to get in her car, she was impressed that he was the host of blah blah, and even the assistant wondered when his company had become so powerful. As I did not have much time, asks the beautiful lady to get back in her car. As soon as she comes up she asks him if he was there just to enjoy lie, and says that many girls, you should find all this interesting to say the least. Then asked if there were any rule in the company that said that he could not have a supercar as a driver, and she says she could. But I had to be careful what I said, and did. After all, could end up being suspended for defaming the company. When he asks if she had that much power, to suspend your license at any time. Finally revealed herself as the president, senior blah blah. Apparently he had not fully believed what she said, and reveals to him that he's a shareholder of blah blah. Soon she decides, show your boarding pass, demonstrating that it actually held that position, and he says that he had not lied to him either, because the day before had purchased the 20% of his company's shares, and she had called him a while ago, saying she wanted to meet him. And only then did he realize that he was Lin. Then she apologizes for having offended him in some way, asking him to give the opportunity to sit down and talk to him when the trip is over. He says he needed to finish some trips first. What makes her ask him to communicate when you are finally free. At the end of his journey, she was unable to make the payment to the protagonist, and only then did he receive a message on his cell phone, saying that because he had raided one of the company's regulations, his license had been suspended. Thus realized that he mayhap was the guy who had called him before, who had made this suspension. The place where he had taken Mrs. Tien was precisely the company that had just suspended its license, while she thought they were offending one of the main characteristics of your company. The protagonist thought it had been the Jinx who had called to complain to the platform again. Tien then told him not to worry, as she would take care of that matter soon, and his license would be back shortly, but he ended up deciding to go with her to personally investigate the situation without thinking twice, and they broke up in the meeting room, and he soon reveals who was saying that his license had been suspended, and I was there to talk to him. The president then passes responsibility to the operations manager, who soon begins to say that he was a very young man for having the value to present themselves there after acting in such a way, also saying that he had called security for him. Tired of listening to, the protagonist decided to sit down and give the floor to Mrs. Tayan, who will soon said that the suspension would be lifted and that the manager shouldn't even have done better research before suspending it, as well as vice president of blah blah. I was stirring it of the position of operations manager of that company. Only when he showed his identification card, they really believed that she was in fact the vice president. The operations manager begins to be explained, trying to find an excuse to justify its action and block the license of the protagonist, which made her ask whether at least that investigated the passenger who had possibly also insulted. Lena had just purchased 21% of the shares of blah blah, becoming the company's largest shareholder. Therefore she did not believe that he would insult a passenger. Then they said he was just the driver of blah blah blah, without believing that this was really true. However, Tian soon tells them to shut up because Lin was on the way to getting to know his company better when they blocked his license. After all this confusion, she decided to cancel the status of her operating company, which caused the president to tell his manager, who apologized to Lin, and so he did, apologizing for his previous attitude. However, the protagonist ended up rejecting his, since, according to its recent actions, it seemed that over the years, Manny had been intimidated by him. Therefore, as a shareholder of blah blah, he approved the decision to Tayan, and his operator Wisdis soon receives a call from Mrs. and asks the mayor to take charge of the rest, since he needed answer that call when answering. She says that the next day would be his grandmother's birthday, so would go out to buy clothes for her and for him as well, and he accepts, saying that he would pick her up in the afternoon. With that, he thinks he couldn't go with his hands empty to his grandmother's birthday party and wonders what the old man would like to receive. Then the boy returns, saying that his license had been unlocked again and had also received maximum access, as I had not had this access before. Asks if drivers have different permits, and she says it's just a few more auxiliary functions. However, one of these functions was precisely enable users to make a request by searching your number and specify the application you would like to make. The way he reacted to this, found this type of function very useful, and then says he had a birthday to go to. So I understand if she knew a good place to sell old paintings. Then she asks if a Sandekian painting was good enough for him. What happened, surprising me that she had access to that painting. I don't really know either what type of paint it is or who, but that doesn't make much difference later on. She says that her president, I would like to get a copy of that painting, and if he wanted it, would send his assistant to pick her up immediately. He then gladly accepts his painting and asks how much it would cost, but she could not accept money from him as he was his second largest shareholder. Asked him to send the painting to the hotel manager. Peninsula, like Lin, did not like to see favors. Said he would give him 1% of his goods in exchange for this paint to be on hand. Clearly she was surprised by his, since only 1% of its assets are equivalent to approximately 500 million coins. That was their currency. After that he said goodbye, saying that she could continue operating in the same way as I was, and that he would not interfere in his work. Then she says that her president, I would like to invite you to visit them in Yangshan, and the protagonist replies that he would soon go, so I would contact her when the time came, thinking that it had been a long time since he had visited the orphanage there for the last time, and I needed to find time to make a new visit. At the end of this trip he finally received another 5-star property, and receive a new travel request in your application to take the person exactly to your hotel. At this time we see a young woman that would soon be a headache for him called the Chanchan. As soon as the Pagani stops next to her, she asks who it was, and he replies that he was the driver of blah blah that he had requested. As soon as it enters the beautiful Pagani, she mentions that her company was very good for having thought of such an original marketing technique. However, he says that the car, it was really theirs and that this was not their idea, but apparently she had not believed what she was saying, thinking he thought she was a child. I'm sorry, I haven't seen the world yet. Realizing that she would be a real problem for him, decides to ignore his comments and end that trip quickly. With that he decided to make a small detour, but she too, thinking that he had done it just so that will pay more in the end. Although shortly thereafter, said he frequented that place often, and that's why I knew a shortcut to get there faster. However, the annoyed girl thought again that he had done it just to increase the value of the trip, so she would pay more for him. At the end of the trip, as soon as you park your Pagani in front of the hotel, realizes that it is likely to. She had a relationship with one of her employees, since I didn't even want to enter through the main entrance, and it's not long before receive a confirmation from a star of it. As he didn't want to stress too much about it, decided to go pick up the gay lady. and soon achieves meet with her, but already remembering him who had not yet left the 5-star mark. After the trip was over, and then he says that would depend on his performance on that day, specific with that, ended up acting even better with her, even offering to carry the bag she had. When they arrive in front of a bikini store, she decides to stop there to buy one, and he tells her that after buying, she could fulfill her promise, made the day they were in their pavilion, and she replies that she would not have made the promise if I had known that he was really the owner of the place. But since he had not forced her to do anything, would now have to face the consequences. It wasn't long before one of the attendees to come and serve them, and in the end, she asked them to finish their shopping there. Surprised by his attitude, he asks her why she hadn't bought anything for herself. And the divine lady replies that none of it fits her well, so he should just buy his own and leave. But if she decided not to, the assistant then says that they had sizes from 2. But like my SD, he wore 1 size and had nothing in his size. With this comment maybe embarrassing the divine lady, and says if they didn't have it there, they only had to go to the other store next to that one, as they would probably have something in their size there. Upon arrival they are impressed with the attire that was in the window, or at least he was, as that outfit was something out of the ordinary. She turns it away, completely embarrassed, so that they can finally make their purchases. As soon as they enter, she asks him to the saleswoman where her bikinis were, and it doesn't happen. A long time for the lady was brought to the latest models that had, as she had not used anything like this before. I seem to have been a little embarrassed by those models, and in the end ended up bringing a more affordable model to Lin. Also gave his opinion, and the opinion of the protagonist was precisely that this model would not be enough to show the true strength she had. With that he gave him the idea of using a model a little more suitable for the divine lady, and with a lot of tenderness in his heart, and also shame, she ends up accepting, then asked the clerk to improvise this model in size. But he decided to wear the one she had liked before. Also, when she says she thought he didn't like her, that model, he replies that he actually liked it very much, but the model she liked, I would use it for going out and having fun, but the one he showed her first was for her to use alone in front of him, and you could already see it on his little face that I was enjoying all this. After that, decides to go to the 4th floor to buy some tailor-made dresses this time. From the beginning she remained with one of the dresses that was on display, and while the protagonist was waiting for his divine lady, she soon appears, asking her to go to the fitting room where she was. When he says it would not make a good impression if she were to enter, she would respond, who only asked him to help him adjust the closure in the back. After all, she could not do it alone. And with a comment additional in this scene, I think our protagonist is a bit indecisive about what he really should have done at that moment, as the view was completely impressive. When he asks if she wasn't showing too much, she said she had a shawl to cover her back. Yet he still doubted that it was really a size, since it looked more like a size 5. What happened, embarrassing her with the comment she had just made. When she finally finishes dressing, he says that dress looked great on her. So since he had liked it, he decided to keep it, while the sales clerk, she said she felt that dress was made for her. Another customer rhymes with his companion at the bottom. Home ready. Fortunes, who we will call Sanshiga here, said to his colleague that she would also like a dress like that, and so on. He asked that assistant to bring the same dress for her. But since that was the only piece they had, because it was made to measure, it could look at other styles. But the guy ended up being, and says that because of the appearance of the protagonist and the lady divine, they could not afford that dress. Therefore he would take it in its place. But soon the divine lady appears, annoyed with the comment that the strange man I had just made Sanjiga, then asked if he really could pay the price of that outfit, since it cost more than 80,000. And the beautiful divine lady replies that she could certainly pay for it herself. Unlike it, I found the girl completely outraged by her response. Although the divine lady had not told any lies, since the girl was really just taking money of the boys. Soon the simp says he would add 20,000 to his commission if he sold her that dress. But that was not in accordance with the rules of the establishment. Thus the protagonist would add 200,000. Also, if I looked at the size of the dress, I would say it would not fit his partner. After all, the girl looked like a board compared to the divine lady. And in the end, ended up giving up buying that dress, especially when he saw that he would only be spending money for nothing. Because he had defended the beautiful lady, she said she would receive a great reward later on. This time it was his turn to try on a suit to go to the party, and the girls in the background were completely delighted by him, even thinking it was a pity. Who was not an intern. When you ask how attractive the divine lady, she replies that it was already fine, because he feared that the young women would get dizzy if he decided to try on a few more garments. And after that they finally decide to leave, although he was anxious to receive finally its reward. Later at his residence in the Lin Pavilion, I was enjoying the beautiful that shone on him, until suddenly an even better view appeared in front of him. completely brightening your day, night, and the rest of the year as well. Apparently, it was not only him who was delighted, since the beautiful lady was also impressed with her smile. Realizing that he was looking at him a lot, he asks if he liked what he saw, and she responds, clearly embarrassed, trying to disguise her gaze. She mentions that since she had put on her bikini, had already fulfilled his promise, Lin then wastes no time, and says he loved people like her who keep their word. After that, he invites her to swim. But at first, she ended up grabbing him, asking him not to let her go, because I couldn't swim. He reassures her, saying he would not let her go, and asks him if he would like him to teach him how to swim, and it seems that the divine lady ended up accepting his proposal. But since he was afraid of drowning, asked him not to let her loose in the water. Swimming lessons would soon begin, but he says he couldn't move if she kept squeezing it like this. After relaxing a bit, finally feels calmer in order to start the lessons, and when he thought he was doing very well, ended up despairing in the middle of swimming, causing it to sink. However, as he is a man of his word, fulfilled his promise, and went after her to save her, and let's just say that something of his air happened to him so that he could, breathing underwater. And my friends, what a beautiful scene we have here. I think this alone is enough to say that the manga worth reading. When he asks if she was scared, she replies that with him around it didn't seem so scary. And after that, he hits the divine lady a big hit, which I clearly don't need to say what happened next, do I? Later, while she was bathing, he asked to use her cell phone, and she gave him the password so he could use it. While on the cell phone of the divine lady, received a visit from the girl in the system again, who said he had already achieved complete 75% of his career. Therefore his reward was the 1 Gian Pier. Basically, this was the second largest cruise terminal, as I had already completed a good part of his career, was not far from unlocking his next recording, and thinks that if he continued at this rate, could unlock the next before the date. Previously programmed limit. Soon the beautiful D appears, saying that because of him, had not been able to learn to swim, but since that was his house, she could go there whenever she wanted to, and next time he would really teach her how to do it. Now we see an old cult, and he says it was because he was coming from the orphanage. So I was used to using them, and that's why I didn't want to throw them away after this revelation. She asks him if he was an orphan, and he says that according to Agmar, when he was born, was taken to an orphanage, and that's where he grew up. She soon apologizes for making you remember something so delicate, but he didn't care much about it. When I was a child, this person named Agmar took care of him and treated him as if he were her son, and had many friends by his side. So it seemed like he had a lot of fun as a child. Then she said she was going to bed, and if he could get up early and take her to work, could be released later and go to her grandmother's birthday party in the afternoon, and he ends up accepting, as he would love to take her to work every day, to be able to complete its mission faster as well. We continue with our protagonist receiving a call, sudden on your cell phone, and when he answered, it was precisely Agmar, the woman who raised him. She mentions that she learned that he had broken up with his ex and ends up recommending a girl I could meet. After all, she was practically the same age as him. Out of respect for her, maybe he called, agreeing to meet the girl, and she had organized a meeting with them the next morning. When it was time for the meeting, he was there to talk to the girl who Agmar had recommended, and quickly manages to find the girl and her family. Soon a woman greets him, and this was the mother of the girl he had gone to meet. She mentions who discovered that he worked in a real estate agency, but when he said he had been fired, the reaction of the bloodsuckers there already showed a slight for Lin. Already thinking he was unemployed, Daisuke Unconductor D talks that he could barely pay his bills, which only made his disdain increase even more soon. She begins to wash his daughter and her qualities, and is already demanding that he buy an apartment in Achund. The girl then begins to think which is the best in the world, saying it was no big deal if he really wanted her, and our protagonist ended up deciding follow their game. One of the relatives says he would have to pay for it, a dote for the girlfriend, 88 million, dust for good luck. When you think this is an exaggeration, the girl's mother mentions that a colleague of her daughter's had received an adoption of 1,600,000. When he mentions that she was practically selling her daughter, apparently he did not like his comment very much, but he asks her to continue with the theft. Now it was his brother's turn to ask for something, and it was precisely a car, imported, that was worth more than 500,000 according to him. Cheap. Even the sum total of everything would be almost 10 million. And Lin, question, if you really think I could get all that money? When the girl's mother comments that young people could getting married without depending on their family, he gives her a threatening look, saying that his parents were dead. Her brother had heard that the orphanage would be relocated to, and when the land was sold, he would receive a share of that value. Finally, after they show their true faces, Lena throws the hot tea she was drinking on the dregs of society, thus revealing that I was just playing with them. But in the end they just wanted to use the money he would receive, as well as was leaving. The mother of the parasite was worried about her son, who said he would not forgive our protagonist. Does not take long. Grab a flower pot to throw at Lin, but failed by a very small margin. The protagonist then says that the consequences of his actions today could be very serious. Especially because although the pot was not hit by the child, spoiled trying to scratch his car, leaving them with a fear that he wouldn't even let go of air in certain areas. When the insolent begins to admire the paganity that had, Lin responds by telling him the value of the car and the cost of 2 million for a painting, also asking him how they would pay. The woman's attitude changed completely when he saw the car he had, but Lin was not impressed by his sudden interest. Gave them an ultimatum, telling them to get the 2 million or they would receive a court summons. When he leaves, the mother of the snake begins to fight with his daughter, blaming her for her departure, and even the spoiled child begins to blame her. As if I had done nothing. Later, Lin decided to visit his recently acquired colleague and meets with the operations manager, being cheated on by a girl that he did not want to pay for the damage he had done to one of the boats. Or rather, she wanted to pay differently. If it could be deduced from this image, the protagonist, when he saw that, asks if he would actually let her go without paying for the damages. Obviously, the manager ended up being very ignorant with Lin, and he replies that as he was the manager, if she did not pay, the money would come out of her pocket, and finally leaves. Shortly thereafter arrives at the site to talk to employees and present himself as the new owner of the place as well. And finally the receptionist takes him to the hall of meetings. When the executives arrived, they received it quite well, but it seemed that the operation manager was missing, who was apparently busy with something else quickly. The boss there asks the receptionist to call the manager as soon as possible, and 5 minutes later the same guy arrives as before. When he sees that Lin was the company's new president, does not know where to put his face, even apologizing and saying he would make up for it, asking for another chance. But now it was too late, and asks the general manager to get the fool out of there. After that, he tells his executives that he wanted to modernize the pier, but since they were already in second place, one of them did not think this change was necessary. However, our protagonist was not happy to be in second place, and it would also give them an increase in the amount of calling everyone there to work on improvements. Upon leaving the company, receives a message from the manager of the Peninsula Hotel, saying that someone had given him a painting in addition. Receives a call, saying that the watch he had ordered earlier was also ready for delivery. When he says he didn't have time, and asks them to send him to the Kyushu, unfortunately failed to do so. Due to the high value of the product, they could only deliver it exactly to the person who purchased it. And he asks them to take him to the place where the lady, the governor's party of would be. During the night, finally, is going to the celebration of the surrounded by her, and the divine lady soon greets him, but let's just say she was embarrassed for him watching, whereas should not have entered the living room. People began to admire the presence of the couple, and finally arrive at the table, where his grandfather was. Unfortunately for Lin, ended up meeting the girl from before, saying that he was just the driver of blah blah, and saying that the protagonist had tried to trick her. Clearly the lady, divine, did not believe her words, and apparently the boy did not like what he had just heard. Even with Mises trying to explain that the car was really his, the girl continued to say negative things about Lin. When one of the girls says to let the blue girl's boyfriend see if he is a liar or not, the Aga introduces the new fan he had. Clearly he decided to defend it by saying that Lin, he was just a blah blah driver. When the father of the divine lady asks what was going on, she explains that Lin was not a fraud, and that his grandfather had only asked the security guards to remove him from there. Until suddenly they arrive, the men of delivery, for the watch that the protagonist had bought. Upon seeing the limited edition watch he had purchased, only then the fool and the snake realized that they were wrong about Lin. After that, the boy tells his granddaughter to apologize for the mistake she had made, but the mother of the snake appeared to defend the scum of society. Listen to his aunt's words. The divine lady did not remain silent, realizing that she was only jealous of her boyfriend. Soon, the scoundrel couple gives the gift to the stranger, and was a collection of dynasty coins. Shin valued at more than 2 million. The lady divine then decides to take a gift out of her bag, saying that that was the protagonist's gift for the championship, who ends up receiving it with pleasure, although it was simple. Sin embargo, Lin says she didn't need to lie for him, and that he actually had brought a gift for the family's pocket. Apparently, even she did not believe at all that I would have brought a gift, and soon delivered the painting I had just received. The old man was by Sandaku's artwork, and the price of that painting was at least 200 million. She saw nothing special in the painting, openly wondering if the old man was worth the price, simply stated that the painting had a meaning that was not visible to the common eye. The fool then says he was being cheated, as they offered 230 million by the same painting to its manager, and he did not want to sell. The rattlesnake then starts bothering the divine lady on purpose, but she was sure that Lin, I would not fool people with a fake painting. The scoundrel then decides to break up that very expensive painting in front of everyone, claiming that this work was false, also saying that this was an ancient world rule. The beautiful lady ended up outraged with him, but Lin soon comforts her by saying he would take care of it. The protagonist says that the Simplum's nurse to operate had just been withdrawn, but apparently he didn't quite believe his words. He then reveals that it owns 20% of the shares of blah and had the right to remove him from the company. Even the Divine Lady said that now was not the time to joke and ask if he really had these actions, and she would reward him later by leaving Miss. And completely embarrassed afterwards. After that he tells the unfortunate man that called his manager to ask if he knew of any Lin. And so it did, saying that he would even put the cell phone on, so that lies of the protagonist were exposed when the manager responded to the telephone. She tells the fool to welcome Mr. Lin. It is right when he mentions that Lin had said he was only 20% of the shares. She says it was because she had given him the paint chandelier to Lin, and since he did not want to take advantage of her, he gave her 1% of the shares. With that, the human scum dies on the ground, realizing the huge mistake he has just made, and as the second largest shareholder, Lin took away the Simplon's operational qualifications. The snake says it did not need go a long way since it was her grandfather's birthday. Even the mother of the rattlesnake joins the conversation, saying that he had no consideration for the family. Lin simply replies that if she had been the Divine Lady, whoever asked for it would have done so immediately, but since it was a simple, disposable like her, I had no reason to do so. Because of the mood, not even he wanted to. That the protagonist felt pity at that moment. Later, asks how the sycophant would compensate for the 200 million frame it had just broken, and soon begins to beg for another chance. The fool even ran towards the rattlesnake, asking for help, but here she dies, saying that he no longer had anything to do with each other. The scoundrel, fearful of what would happen now, even clings to her, begging her not to abandon him. And Lin, to see that, says it was not worth humiliating herself for such a woman. After that, the protagonist tells him to the lady's father that brings the family together, because I had something to tell everyone. In the living room, the boy asks, what is the mystery I was hiding? And even the rattlesnake asked him to simply say what he wanted, and so it did, saying that she was meeting with 2 people in the hotel he owned. He also had some videos on his cell phone to prove what she was really doing there. By showing the test to the suspect, quickly became outraged by the lack of shame of his granddaughter. She even tries to explain, saying that he had only gone to talk business, but gets a good slap afterwards. The mother of the rattlesnake tries again to defend his daughter, but this time he ended up receiving a reprimand from Misuski's father, and finally Lin decides to leave with the Divine Lady, as she had a lot to talk about outside. Thanks him, and he only thanks him, requests that you make more travel requests to compensate for it, but she ended up thinking she would ask for something more difficult, showing me a somewhat disappointed face. As there would be no more birthday banquet, decided to accept a few more trips to finish its mission quickly. Now we have a view of a beautiful teenager, which was apparently being molested by a boy interested in her, but since I was not interested in going with him, said that the car he just called would arrive there soon. Did not take long, and soon the protagonist stops his car in front of her, asking him if she was the lady who had made the application in the blah blah application. When she replies that he does ask her to come up since he was the driver she was waiting for. And so he did, by leaving the boy who was interested in her with his face on the floor. Inside the car she dies. Why he still did trips if I had a beautiful car, and he just thought the car didn't matter. The important thing was to earn money for yourself. Upon arrival at her destination, she asked for added in the social network neighbor, and he asked why he wanted to add it there. When she asks him if he believed in love at first sight, he says she was very innocent, especially since he clearly could be a boy. Bad, so it was better that she was more careful. And when she gets out of the car, he thinks girls nowadays are too naive. Then receives a call from the girl who was trying to get money out of him earlier, asking him to pick it up. The next day Lin then asks if she had already gotten the 2 million to repair his car, and that the next day he would go to get the money. She then tells him to stop with those jokes, and that the other day they were just trying it out, as he had passed the family test. He and she were now a couple. Apparently he did not like them very much. The loose screws this girl has on her head, and responds rudely by saying that if they didn't pay the compensation for scratching their car, would receive a court summons. Shortly thereafter we see that the girl he had gone to pick up was precisely the streamer from the other video. She was going to the international circuit, which he also possessed. An official event would take place there, and she was going to try to make a transmission live there while they were going. The circuit came up with the idea of feeding it while he was driving, and of course he liked that when he got there too. He was curious to see the reason for all the fuss, and decided to enter with her as well. As soon as they enter, they already find 2 rival streamers having a confrontation. Ms. You decided to ask what was going on. The young man replies that the girl in front of him, she was trying to get rid of him, and you, but according to her, was that racetrack owner who said it was only needed a presenter, as the racetrack was too big, they could all transmit peacefully. But still that wasn't enough for her. And I really wanted them to leave. Then a person arrives, saying that everything was ready to enter, and with that we say goodbye, asking their rivals to leave, since they didn't have much to do now. Unfortunately, that was the only option they had at the time, but Lin soon arrives taking over. saying that they could stay there to transmit. Outraged by the protagonist, the girl from before tells him that I understand, and that if he dared to mess with Kim, I would lose my life without knowing it. With that, Lin decided to challenge her, telling him to call him if his mother was a man. Then I try calm the protagonist, telling him that they would no longer transmit there, so he didn't need to be angry, but he refuses. Gently your offer to calm down, saying that he would make sure that both of them live broadcast. There when the young man asks who he was, she didn't know how to respond very well either, but he still believed that I could trust him no matter what the young man did. Also decided to rely on her friend's instincts and go with Lin. When you get there, we see several luxury cars parked ready to run, and both streamers from before were impressed with the perfection of these machines. After that, Lin, he says that with him there no one could throw them out, and it doesn't happen. Long time for Kim, Bai and the manager arrive together with the girl from before. She then plays the victim and tries to get Kim to play the role of the edgy of the place. Quickly the manager receives it very well. When he sees that Kim knew the guy she thought was a nobody, asks him if he knew that person, which in this case is our protagonist, then responds rudely to the girl, saying that he was the owner of the Chinese circuit. Then Lin asks if she was her friend, as I had been very rude to him a while ago, but Kim responds soon that I was just a girl, anyone, and that he was going to throw it out at that moment. Then asks him not to throw it away, as his career would end if he did. But since he knew Lin's character well, I knew that if she didn't give in he would never kick her out. And after that she was taken out by the security guards. Kim asks if this girl was his new partner, and also if she was his new partner. Lin would not like me to introduce you to some foreign girls. Yet all that fun just for Kim. Recognized the young man from before, surprised with the way he treated even Kim, thinking that the protagonist was somehow very powerful. After that the young man suggests that they run on this new track, and continues to accept. Before starting the Kim race, suggested that they make a bet to make things more interesting. Basically, would have to pay a difference of 100,000 per second at the end of the race, and Lin once again agrees to bet with him soon. Begin to run, but there was still not much of a chance for young Kim, as the protagonist dies against him once again. In the end the young man pays 2 million from his heart, heavy, already tired of losing to him. With that the protagonist asked the manager who would take that money and reprint his car because of the previous scratch. Also asked the streamers to continue broadcasting. Also, since I need to leave soon to do the walks, and the beautiful you thanks you for your help, Kim. Then asked what I was doing, as he had a beautiful streamer right in front of him. But I still wanted to continue with the walks, and Lin asks if he wanted to participate as well, but the young man ended up politely rejecting his offer. Leaving that race track, realized that there were only 3 more applications and could complete that mission. After this Lin decided to visit his aunt to eat the food that she prepared. She was surprised by her visit, says he had to pick up his daughter from school, but still asks what he would like to eat, and that he would quickly prepare something for himself. I thought I would pick up his daughter for her and that she could take care of making the food calmly. Upon arrival at the site, I had been waiting for 20 minutes, and there was still no sign that the girl would come out until he asks her to a child if the students were still in school. However, it seems that they had all been released. Then decides enter and soon finds a little fuss in his class. Note the presence of a beautiful smile, and if I'm not mistaken, he seems to know it from somewhere. In addition, the mother of one of the students was making a beautiful show of embarrassment. All this just because the young woman had hit him in the face, but it was he who had mistreated the little girl first. Otherwise, she would not have done it. Then comes Lin, stealing the scene by saying that with the look on his son's face, would not even have the opportunity to enter the industry of the boy he wanted. By the reaction of the beautiful princess it seems, meet the protagonist as well, and he asks what had happened for her too, for I was trapped there until this hour. The girl then, but still the snake says that if they do not pay the compensation today this would not end well. The girl, almost crying, says that it was the young man who harassed her first, and the Naja found nothing wrong with his son's attitude in harassing her, and even insults the girl, saying that he had to endure it in silence because he was poor. This attitude made Lin would lose patience and make a will Smith and slaps the rattlesnake well. Outraged by her attitude, she even comments on how he dared to hit her. But you could already see who I was following, that insignificant. The old woman then decided to offend the girl's teacher, this time saying that would resort to her husband to resolve this situation. With that the beautiful smile responds by saying it was all his fault, and that even if he went to court he would be of no use. The disgusting old lady, even though she wants to be right, threatened the whole school this time, but the secretary still says they could to leave and that she would take care of the current situation. However, before they left, the boy's father arrived, spoiled, and the baby told his daddy, who was the one who struck the snake, of his mother's rattle. Now it was the old man's turn to be embarrassed, saying that his boss was Kim Jong and that if she messed with him there would be no way Lin live longer in Songhae. Realizing who the guy's boss was, Lin decided to call Kim, asking him who he was, manager of his company who wanted him to kneel down. Even after winning the bet, Kim even thought Lin was joking, but recently we saw that all this was true. Then told the protagonist that he would find out who was the idiot who was doing this, and I would certainly give you an explanation. The guy from before asks to whom he had called, and when he replied that it was precisely Kim Jong did not believe what the main character said, and it's more, he even thought that Lin, he had made it all up. Until suddenly his cell phone rings, and when he answers it, it was precisely Kim, who thought how he dared to provoke Lin, and orders him to take all his things and left that company immediately. After that his pose, hard guy fell apart completely, and says he would apologize to Lin. Immediately at that moment the guy, I was completely stunned, as he had just taken out a loan to buy a house and a car. The rattlesnake then asks what happened, so that he is on his knees on the ground, and he responds by saying that him himself has just fired him. After that he begged Lin to give him another chance, asking him not to let Kim to fire him, but the protagonist said nothing about it, and just kicked that bastard. It was lucky that he had gone to pick her up instead of his mother, otherwise who knows how much they would have been intimidated by them, and tells them to go from there and become better people. Upon arriving at the scene, the young woman, I was about to tell what had happened at school and how Lin had acted, but he gently asked the little girl not to say nothing about it, and she understood that it would only be her secret. We continue with Lin going to visit the lady, Divine, in her workplace. When he gets there he realizes that even late at night, she was the only one who continued to work overtime, even though it was in danger. When he sees her eating her cookies, I confess that I found this little girl, gluttonous, too pretty. Then decides to play a tasteless joke on him by making jump in fright at the Divine lady. A little later she ended up locking herself in her office and calls our protagonist, asking him to pick it up at his workplace. However, Lin rejecting her application, saying that he was now working outside the city. Yet the beautiful lady responded by saying that she had very afraid that there was something there in the company, and he finally asks her to wait there. A few seconds later listen a knock on the door, and runs to say that her boyfriend would be there soon. Therefore that person should leave immediately. As soon as he realizes that the above voice was precisely that of her boyfriend, runs into the arms of the protagonist, telling him what just happened. When he finally realized how quickly he got there, he decided to tell her that he was outside the whole time with it. She ended up fighting with him for making such a bad joke, case to soothe the heart of the Divine lady. He says he did it just to show him how dangerous it was for her, working so late at night alone. After that he takes out a container of fried rice he had obtained from his aunt previously. It doesn't take long to recognize whose rice it was, because although she was a multimillionaire, she also liked to eat in outdoor positions. As he had frightened her, the beautiful lady decided to give him a punishment, where I would basically have to feed it, and let's say this costs being more a reward than a real punishment. It was late at night, so as soon as she finished eating, he would take her home. This only made the admiration of the lady Divine for him to grow even more, as other kids at this hour would be getting ready to go partying, and he was the only one who really helped pick it up. Of work soon Lin received a call from Kim, who said he had arranged with some girls, which would probably be of the protagonist's type. But with a beautiful angelic vision at her side, Lin, I thought there was no girl who could paint, who was better than Miss. Doubting the protagonist, Kim asked him to send a picture of her, and he had the idea to take a selfie, as the Divine lady has never taken a selfie before. I really didn't know what to do, in addition to having to put on makeup as well. But with beauty like that, who needs makeup anyway? The Divine lady ended up being a little too far away, and he asked her to come over. After that he shows her what would be the perfect and selfie for you to meet Kim. And finally they take the picture his friend had asked for, making Kim extremely envious of the protagonist by the beautiful lady who was next to him. Upon leaving the company, he asked her not to place an order, as I would take it home normally. But since she wanted to support him in his work, insisted on asking for a trip. Let's say that here he launched one of those ingenious phrases, saying that a rich woman approached him, so I would have to take advantage of it in any case. But clearly the rich man here is actually him. Inside the car, she asks what it should do in order to create a charitable foundation. After that she gives some instructions he should follow, and of course the risks you could also run, but he didn't care much about that, and still, so I would do the best I could. Shortly thereafter, finally finished the trip to the house of the Divine lady, but he still extended an invitation to her, asking him to accompany him to Yangchun the next day. And she replies that if I had some free time, it would be an honor to accompany him. When finally gave the last smile, 5-star that our protagonist was missing from, the girl from before appears again, rewarding him for having reached 100% of his current career. After this, she asks if she would like to start a new career, and by clicking on it, she welcomes you. Basically his new work experience would be as a physical education teacher. It also costs another 500 million, and also an enhancement potion, completeness of attributes, and the knowledge of the sages. Lin thinking it would be too easy to be a physical education teacher, and she replies that if he drank that potion, no problem, with any required subject matter or anything like that. The potion was called the knowledge of the wise men, and the young woman made replies that basically was the inspiration for all the major scholars of the world, all compiled in a single prototype of knowledge. Scared by the things they needed to know in order to teach physical education at that university, decided to take the potion that the maid had given him. The girl with the beautiful system began the protagonist's new career and began to receive knowledge of all subjects, as she had said before. Also, she says that this potion increased all of the protagonist's attributes. So now the guy was completely in shape. Then giving a big hug to the beautiful system lady as a thank you. During the night, receives a call saying that his Pagani was ready and that they would send someone to pick it up. After that, he also receives a message from the divine lady saying that I could not accompany him the next day, but that he had still booked his flight for the morning. The next day at the airport, discovered that he would travel first class, as he was relaxed looking at his cell phone. A guy with two companions also appears in first class. The girls then, as soon as they notice the protagonist, begin to admire him. The boy, spoiled out of envy or jealousy, ends by saying that the important thing was to be a rich young man with money, instead of just a handsome guy. Lin, hearing what he said, he asked him to stay out of it if he wanted to brag to them. When the young man sits down, he decides to make a bet with Lin, where basically, who first got the number of the assistant of flight would win the bet. Talking about her, soon enters to attend to the passengers, and the spoiled child flames it, saying that he and his colleague would like to get his number. However, he can only choose one of them soon. She remembers a warning she had received earlier, where basically some rich young people, they might want to with her, but she responds courteously, saying he was against the company's rules, add passenger numbers. But apparently he did not really accept that answer, and says that a passenger's wish could not be rejected so easily. When the flight attendant notices that Lin, I need an editing claw, limited cost of more than 10 million. Quickly decided to take his number. I found the spoiled boy with his face on the floor. To make things worse, his colleagues also ended up making fun of him. Then the young man who accompanied him noticed the presence of a beautiful lady who had just arrived. Then we see that the beautiful lady was in fact precisely the divine lady, and the protagonist decides to make a bet with the boy again, to see who I would first get the contact of that beautiful damsel. After that, politely the lady is with Lin, and the guy from before starts trying engage in a conversation to obtain their number. However, Lin ended up taking an unexpected action by saying that the young man, I didn't even stand a chance with her there. Without reacting, the boy, I just didn't know how to act at the time. And the protagonist says that he had a superpower where, basically, could make her fall in love with him in just 1 second. But because of her little face, that happened a long time ago. As the young man did not know about their relationship, said she could go to the police if she wanted to, as they had 2 witnesses. There what happened, making her feel even more embarrassed by the attitude of Lin, but since the plane was too full, he just wanted to get some fresh air. In addition, she was clearly feeling more and more ashamed with all this situation. With that, finally made the young man admit defeat and recognize that Lin, it was really amazing. Then Lin asked why he was there, since she had said she would be busy, and clearly I had only told him a small lie to accompany him on his visit to the orphanage that day. The guy from before was full of envy from our protagonist, as Lin did not like what the child spoiled had just called him, decided to confront him. The young man then responds, saying I didn't even know her, but he still put his arms around your waist, reaffirming that he was in fact what he had just said. With that, Lin says this was really love. At first glance, that would lead to the wedding, and that he could never understand something like this. After that, she ends up nagging him a little bit, saying that he had taken advantage of her since he got on the plane, thus receiving a slight pinch of the beautiful lady who no longer knew how to respond to his provocations. A few hours later, finally arrive at the orphanage where Lin grew, and although properties there were even cheaper, that building was certainly worth tens of millions. This made Lin's admiration by Wangmo would grow even more, since she still preferred to be there, caring for young orphans instead of living a lie like a rich lady. Soon some children notice the presence of our protagonist with his girlfriend, and she gives them some gifts I had brought, especially for children. With a smile as sweet as that is a little difficult becoming when Huanma says he could have warned him that he was coming on a visit to have prepared for him your favorite dishes. He replies that he wanted to surprise them, and what a surprise, as she had rushed him to find girlfriend soon and ended up taking a plane. The divine lady introduces herself, and his full name is Ai Chinyang, but I prefer to keep calling her divine lady, beautiful maid, and the original message, since from now on they would be a family. Madam Mom told him she didn't need to bring anything next time. When the old man comes out to divide things so that children can eat, realizes that the young woman, Lin Yu, had also come visit them with her boyfriend, exactly the same day as our protagonist was passed. who she was. He replies that this girl also lived in the same place, orphanage than him, but she prefers to go to college. While he had gone to Shangjia does not take long to see you with her boyfriend who honestly already looked spoiled. I had also brought some gifts for the orphans, and when the young man sees the boys admiring the car there was more closely, showed typical behavior of people, selfish people who think that people, with less money than they are nothing more than insects. As soon as Yu notes the presence of Lin asks him to introduce his girlfriend. Courteously the divine lady introduces herself, showing that he was happy to meet the girl. Apparently Yu, still meeting the divine lady, very beautiful and pleasant to be his sister-in-law the lover. Here he ended up being too delighted with Miss, and went to greet her in need of a bib apparently. However Lin interrupts it quickly, saying they didn't need to be so formal at the time, thus leaving Met completely admire, outraged by how he had managed to achieve to a girl as beautiful as she is. The young man says he would donate 100,000 to the orphanage, and when the lady hesitated to accept the donation, Lin told him to accept it. After all, no matter how small a fly's leg is, it's still flesh to hear. This the young man challenges Lin to make a donation as well, and he quickly accepts, saying that he would make a donation of 100 million. Thinking that the protagonist was joking with him, he asked her to stop counting such early jokes. The bad lady asks them not to talk about it now since they have just arrived. But the young man continues with the subject, saying that if I donated 100 million, I would donate 10 times more than him. Lin, upon hearing this, he decides to make a call, giving the account number to send 100 million to my sis mom. As soon as she does, she also receives the amount of money. He almost had a heart attack when he saw so many zeros on his account. The guy from before did not believe it, and decided to verify personally Lin's cell phone. Seeing that it was really true, Lin asks when he would make his $1 billion donation to my sis mom. Like that's what she said she would do. Even the lady divine realized that her boyfriend was a case in point, lost, and really liked to provoke people. After that the boy didn't even know where to hide his face, and soon he will leave, saying he had things to do, therefore he was going to leave. When Miss Yu tries to go after him, the protagonist says he would not be happy with him, so it was better to let him go. Then the lady asks where he had obtained so much money from, and the lady divina replies that she had large projects that costs hundreds of millions of Americans. With that she asked for his account number to be able to return the money he had just earned. Sin Embargo Lin responds that he should keep the money, as he was now able to obtain even more than that, and asks them to go eat. In paradise the lady divine questioned if he would not like to accompany her to a branch of your company, as there were some problems occurring, and she needed to solve them. Just a warning. I found out that she was actually the president of the company for which he worked, Lin, of which he was dismissed on the first day of service. That is, she was the one who had more authority than everyone there. Therefore, she was possibly the founder of the Lin company. Responds that the chances of finding something there are low, but since she was too conservative, thinking not to tell them I was going to pay a visit would do some good in the end. He ended up agreeing to go, and says goodbye to his adoptive mother. Only when the lady divina noticed the clothes she was wearing, decided to change before they went to the branch office. While he waited patiently outside the door, the beautiful maiden appeared asking for her help to close the zipper on the back of her. However, the premature closure getting stuck in some kind of fabric or something like that, and he asked her to wait until I could get some scissors to cut it. Let's say that one of his garments was frayed in one place, so I needed to cut it or the zipper wouldn't close. After finally managing to cut the thread, made it to the divine lady's branch. At the reception, it was clear that the employees were not waiting for her there, and soon orders that I would like you to bring that year's accounts to the hall of meetings while reviewing the accounts. We can also glimpse the great beauty that she possessed, the character, and now that you've looked long enough, we can continue with the summary. Then asks what happened to Wine Chenji, who was someone of power in that branch. In addition to the company's accounts, flows in the red for more than 30 million, and decided to call the police. Shortly thereafter, some thugs appeared in his office, saying they were there to collect a debt of 1 million that Wayne Chenji owed them. Realizing that the divine lady was very beautiful, the guy playing says that if it happened sometime with him I would forgive this debt. Best wishes to the divine lady, completely speechless behind this comment. But as a self-respecting Sigma, our protagonist realizes that all of this was actually a setup of the Genji. When their leader shows when he hears what Lin just said, Lin question if 2 million would be enough to take Chenji to the police, quickly decide to change sides, saying they can do that, and some extras too. But the only thing that Lynx wanted to go after the traitor who was embezzling money from the company of the beautiful damsel. She, without knowing what to do now, asks him for help, and he tells him to separate financial information, and he would take it to the police. At the door of the police station, he says that this matter could not be made public, because if it were published in the financial newspaper, your company's market value would fall rapidly. And she, after hearing what she had to do, thanks him, saying he wouldn't know what to do if it weren't for him soon. Lin replies that she would go alone, since he was after the guy who was embezzling money. But since this was dangerous to her, insisted, saying that he could not let him go alone. However, the protagonist gives him the documents, asking him not to worry about him, and finally sets out to find the boy, while the lady divine asks you in your thoughts to be careful. 3 hours later, Lena shows up with Chenji, and we see the divine lady all over the place, with all this situation. But as soon as he sees our protagonist, it seems that their world has been filled with color again, and runs off asking if he had been hurt. But he replies that it was fine, and that the rest now depended on the police, and the judge. The bully then apologizes to Miss Chi, saying that he would even return the money to the house, the car and everything you can buy with it. However, it was too late for him, so he would have to pay for his crimes, as they had nothing else to do there. After solving this problem, she tells them to go say goodbye to their mother and return to Yunga, and soon, in the place where they would be staying, she says that thanks to him, everything ended up working. Therefore, as a reward for their recent actions, she would cook especially for him, playing Lin. Relatively surprised to discover that he could cook, and she reveals that he in fact had great culinary skills. After that, he decided to show off his skills in the kitchen, and let's say it looks like that he must have other types of skills as well, if you know what I mean. While he tasted the delicious food that the divine lady had prepared especially for him, she asked him to try even more, then mentions who had seen her talking on the phone recently, and asks if he was solving issues related to the previous case, but she in fact was already preparing the evidence to be able to hire a new person the next day, and as she was the president of the company, I had to be able to handle these things quickly. After Lin, I just comments that I didn't expect her to be so good at this, therefore decided to give him a reward as well. She even tries to say that she didn't have to do anything, since it was he who had helped his company a lot recently. However, Lin quickly approaches her in order to reward her by asking her to close her eyes, and soon it ends, receiving a great reward from our protagonist, who obviously he doesn't beat around the bush and takes life very seriously. Notice that she had gone to the company early and suddenly receives a mysterious call. When answering, it was the resource manager, humans at the university where he would teach, saying that he could officially start the next day, and he replies that he would be there in time. Early the next morning, we have a beautiful view of this university, where basically it could already be seen that in that place, what was most was a beautiful, healthy youth. Then gets a call from his girlfriend, who was a divine lady, asking her to take her. But he says he could no longer, because he had stopped being a driver to become a professor at the university, and since that was his first day on the job, could not leave early. Initially we did not believe him at all, but clearly with the physique he had, and the instructions you also received when he drank that potion before, I was more than qualified to work there. It does not happen long before the university students begin to admire our protagonist, saying that if they had such a handsome teacher, would never miss classes. At the Lin office, was introduced as the new professor, and here we meet the director of the university named Sui. Clearly she was not there to waste time, so he quickly told her that he would have to work hard. There she had an assignment for him to complete, and only then would I receive a class to teach. In this part I will try to sum it up well for you so I understood the task of Lena here was precisely to hire some hotels to obtain an internship for the value of 3,000, with accommodation included for the intern. But even realizing the real director's intentions, he responds politely saying that I would try, although it was a very difficult task. Shortly thereafter, one of the teachers showed the place where Lin would work and gave him some advice so that I could complete this task a little faster. That's why Lin decided to contact immediately with the hotels that the professor had given him, but it looked like he had another plan up his sleeve, and as the owner of the Peninsula Hotel, he decided to call precisely to its general manager, asking him to go quickly to the place where he was. A short time later, the protagonist explains to the manager what was the plan he had in mind, and after that he decided to go to the place where the director was. Thinking I was breaking the rules for bringing a stranger there, was about to start scolding Lin. However, he said that as she had asked him to, contacting a place for an internship had done so, and there was the person responsible for the hotel with which he had contacted suggestive, without knowing the situation well, thought that girl was actually his new wife. But in reality it came out Malin. She impressed with Lin's efficiency. I couldn't believe he had found quickly a place with that. Lin introduces the general manager of the hotel Peninsula, asking him to talk to him about the details. Then the manager introduces himself and says he had accepted his offer to pay a salary of 3,500 in addition to the cost of housing for the new intern, and that if she had any complaints regarding the salary, to talk more about it. However, the director had no complaints at all, so his colleagues soon they would contact him again. Then Lin received some skill points as a reward, thus completing 20% of his career, and as a reward for that he obtained the Shanghai Institute, Longxin, which was a very renowned research institute. Lin, without realizing it, was looking at that empty, and the teacher asks him if he was okay, but he replies that he was only lost in his thoughts. Plus the professor mentions that it was truly amazing to have a Chi solve such a difficult problem, in such a short time. Shortly thereafter, the general manager of Lin says goodbye and soon asks if he could now schedule his class for the next day. The director then, as she had no more excuses this time, said he could. And finally our protagonist says goodbye to her. As Lin leaves the director's office, asked the teacher, "I also didn't quite understand what this person really is." To prepare only the physical education class for Lin. Then we found out that the rate of assistance in physical education classes was less than 30%. Therefore, if the attendance rate, the rate was less than 95%, the teacher's salary would be immediately reduced by half. But apparently that was precisely what she wanted. Since it made perfect sense that Lin received this responsibility, we continue with Lin going to visit the cruise port he had gained. Until suddenly a car almost ran him over. In addition to the driver said that he was the one who was wrong, basically, and that he should not touch it in the car. As soon as the woman gets out of the car, starts bragging that his car is worth $1 million. Therefore he would not be able to pay if the car was scratched. But the protagonist replies that it was only 1 and also not even when he drove a Pagani, acted like her. But apparently the woman didn't even believe a word of what he had just said about it. Showing to be a completely proud person in the room of meetings. At the end they call him attention for his delay and says he found himself with a person in the mirror that made her arrive late initially. We noticed a rivalry between this woman and another employee of the company for some time now, and soon appears our protagonist called the Harpy from before, surprised to see that the owner of the place was precisely the type who I had just called a bastard. When Lin asks if she was an employee of that company, an employee answers you with his position, and who was also famous. But since she was so famous, both she had to leave because they did not need people like her there. The young woman from before begins to apologize for having acted in this way before, asking for another chance. But since people with his attitude were not worth their time, ended up being excluded from this operation and missing a great opportunity. After that the girl from before begins to explain her plan to make it the cruise terminal, largest in the world. Lin even liked his idea and asks what he could do if you receive 200 million for renewal soon. Responds that it would convert that port is one of the 5 best in the world. When he asks whether it could maintain the port as an industry leader for more than 10 years if it were to invest 800 million. Her and the others employees were speechless when they heard a sum of money, exorbitant of money to be mentioned, but the young woman still replies that she was confident that it could meet their expectations. And with that he finally decides to leave, saying that he would pay 200 million in advance for the project. Then our protagonist received a call of the director of the Longshan Research Institute who wanted to talk to him about the acquisition of the institute by Lin. The next morning, arrived relatively happy for the new day's work, but the director soon asks him to prepare for class. Then she explains about the attendance rate, saying that if I were a minor, 95%, the total bonus for the class would be reduced. But he was still happy, especially since I wasn't there just for the money. I just wanted to be able to teach his class. However, since she had already fixed everything, practically forced to teach the class. Now on the way to the classroom meets 2 students who detained him, asking him if he is going to teach the class. Since he had a textbook in his hand, Lin responds that his next class would be precisely physical education, and that he was on his way to the classroom at the time. The girls then ask him where his classroom was in order to support him, and just after telling them the location of the classroom decided to leave. The girls then sent a message to their friends, saying that the new professor I would be teaching in a short time, thus alerting all those who might attend his class. For now in the classroom where Lin I was going to teach, there were few people present, and the director arrives shortly thereafter, thinking that I could not break the 50-person mark in your classroom. But suddenly they notice an unknown movement around and discover that many of the students had gone to witness our protagonist's class. She, without knowing what to do or what was going on, began to wonder what that was, and apparently the good looks of Lin attracted all the girls to her class, or at least a small part of them. But it seems that not only the girls had gone to witness his class, as there were even students, men as well, and in a short time the classroom was completely full. The teacher then asks them to leave, since it was no longer necessary to count how many students was in the classroom, but she insisted on staying and said he would like to see how I would teach this class. As in a normal class, decided to start by passing, ready for Annie, that it was not called, could approach him to enroll in his class. Half an hour later, they had already passed the number 120, and they had not yet put all the names on the attendance list. The director then mentions that registration could be set aside, so they could start the class immediately. But apparently, the girls didn't like that very much, especially since he might end up forgetting them. In addition, he had his own teaching method, so she shouldn't interfere with the rhythm of the Lin class, and received some intended glances, completely macabre directed towards her. And finally the director ended up giving in and concluded that Lin will teach the class in its own way. When the registration ended, was ready to start class. But a girl mentions that she had not called her name, so he decided to retake the list. But in the end, a bell rang, and he says goodbye to his students, saying they would continue in the next class. Even the director was speechless, since he had never seen anything like this in his life. Then asks his superior if his classes were up to the task, and with a lot of anger she dies, yielding and answering that yes. And finally Lin says goodbye, as he still had a lot of things to do. Shortly thereafter he finishes, receiving a visit from the girl in the system from before, the same as always, congratulating him on having completed practically his first class. As a reward he had earned a humble memory. And he asks what was the difference with the knowledge of that wise men he had recently received. Basically the knowledge of the master was very extensive, but the knowledge of the master would give an experience, specialized in a certain field, but he was the one who had to select the knowledge he would like to use. After that he ends up asking who was the most powerful man in the chip field, and when she answers who it was, decides to acquire exactly that mastery for himself. With that he was definitely prepared in order to achieve a breakthrough in the chip field. At the research institute, London that Lin owned, we see two employees, Luan and Lishu. Two important people at the institute waiting for our protagonist. The girl was then outraged, thinking that his research may soon be completed, as the institute was acquired by a wealthy young man. However, the boy soon tries to calm her down since she was deemed too hasty by acting and thinking that way. Another person joins the conversation, and he basically believed that Lin I knew nothing about the research institute, and talking about him a little later he arrives and decided to show him the place. Our protagonist then comments that his equipment was too old-fashioned, but the old replies that they had no way of replacing him at the time, since they did not have enough money. Then the old man gives information about his current situation and Lin would take a look and come back to them later. The guy from before then tried to talk to Lin, saying that had some things you would like to say as a team member. Was basically asking the protagonist who did not meddle too much in his work, allowing them to act as they wanted. After that he understand which was the graduation of the guy who had just referred to him, and responded that he had it in information and communication technology. Then Lin replies that he thought his diploma was from kindergarten, given the way he had recently acted. Then the boy brags a little about the university from which he graduated, thinking I was a weird person, therefore asking him not to insult him if possible, but Lin only belittled ignorant people like him. Also had absolute control over the institute, so if I didn't want to follow his orders, just had to pack up his things and go. He'll then try to defend the guy from before, and he again responds that if he left now it would be an incalculable loss for Lin. This was due to the research he was conducting that could allow them to advance at least 10 years in the national chip industry. As the boy thought too much about himself, Lin ended up taking the opportunity to teach him a lesson, and that the earth would never stop turning just because of him. But the young man still insisted that without him, this project would never be completed. Then asked the deputy director what project this was, and when the old man finishes explaining what exactly it was, the protagonist asks if it was difficult, and he answers yes. With that Lin decided to do it instead of the guy before. Then the interpreter asks what was the graduation of Lin by saying that he had a degree in marketing. The old man was surprised by him with Lin's initiative to solve this problem. Even the guy from before decided to let him work in peace, and shortly thereafter had already encountered several errors and others failures also. After finishing writing all codes again, could now continue to do the rest of the tests. When the boy asks if I didn't need to check again, Lin responds that it would not be necessary to. Looking closer, he realizes that this was a perfect structure to work with, and how I had solved a problem that the previous young man had taken a long time to make. Could now leave since he was no longer needed there. After this, Lin asks the old man to make a list of obsolete equipment essential to be replaced by more modern ones. I would also call it later to send him the 50 million so that they could buy new equipment, and would also add a bonus salary for them. After that the old man I had nothing more to say before, and only thanks him for his. The girl then apologizes for having acted in this way before, and would like to ask you a professional question. However, since he did not have much time available, he ends up giving him his personal contact so that she can contact him again if they had any questions. When the deputy director left, he decided to accompany him, and suddenly Lin noted the presence of two people there, one of them being the president of the university where the protagonist taught. Was there possibly to borrow the laboratory? But since the institute had now been purchased, I would have to speak directly with the owner of the place, and that I decided to present who was the new owner of the laboratory. The president, after greeting him, he says they would pay for the use laboratory, but the protagonist says that it would not be necessary, and in addition, would donate the old equipment to the university since they would no longer be was useful. The president's secretary asks if they did not know each other. Lin responds that they had met in the Department of Human Resources a few days ago. Soon the president asks what he was doing, teaching at a university, if he had the power acquisition to purchase the research institute, and as always, he simply replies that it was to experience life, as Lin had made a donation. Listen to the university's research team. By donating the equipment, the jury was going to promote him to vice director. Sin embargo, our protagonist did not want to be too important there, so I would give this position to Lin. But I would keep it private, and few people would know about it. The next day, Lin was getting ready for another day at work. Until suddenly a child, spoiled, arrives to disturb his peace when Lin heard that the young man was behind him and asked him who he was. Soon we discovered that this child actually was something of an admirer of the director, Shu, and I was there thinking that Lin was causing problems for her. But in reality I think I was just jealous of her, and Lin should have even thought so too. The young man said he was just a toy, so it would be better if he left. However, as Lin was not receiving orders from anyone, openly decided to go against the young man's will. The teacher tries to warn Lin not to say anything since the young man, spoiled, was the schoolboys. Does not take long, and the lady, Chu, also arrived asking why this child, spoiled, was there, as he had asked her to stop visiting his office. With respect to the professional relationship between Lin and she, the young man did not have to interfere, leaving the little boy of old like this, with your face on the floor, after seeing their proximity. After doing that, she explains by saying, who only did it because she didn't want the child to keep screwing with her, but our protagonist didn't care to serve a beautiful woman, and with that comment, I would like her to look at him with different eyes from now on. Shortly thereafter, after the young man's departure, she gets a call from the university's vice-chancellor, and she says she wanted to talk precisely to Lin, and finally asks, be kind so as not to make your situation any worse. In the office of the vice-chancellor, we see the boy, spoiled from before, who said that at that very moment, we're firing Lin. But before that, he would like to know the real reason for his dismissal. The boy then mentions, who believed that Lin's abilities were not enough to qualify him to teach at that university. After that, he decided to answer a message on his cell phone, where the president of the university said that he had everything ready to become the honorary vice-rector. However, as it was now being fired, there was nothing more I could do about it. Upon hearing this, the president quickly goes to the room where he was linked to find out what was going on. The vice even tries to explain that Lin's ability were not suitable for me to work there. But of course the president did not believe it, especially because he had gone through so many problems to take him to college as vice-rector. And yet the boy could have put him in such shame. Even though I had had such difficulty before taking Lin there. The president then says that Lin was the director of the Longjin Research Institute, and the only ones who were not worthy of a position there were precisely him and his. Therefore, they should resign. Voluntarily resign. The former even asks for a second chance. But the president responds that he had already given him too many opportunities, and that has always got him in trouble. With that, the young man ended up receiving a good slap in the face because of his selfish attitude. After all this embarrassment, the president apologizes, with our protagonist was also promoting Lin as the new mayor of the university, but ended up politely rejecting, since he would only like to be a teacher, common, and be at peace. As the president knew he was they would say he was only a deputy director, but I would still be the hero. Therefore they would not make their position public, and in the end Lin ended up accepting. In the director's office, he and the teacher from before were upset, thinking that Lin would be fired. But soon the president appears with him there. I wasn't there just to talk, and broke the news that on Tuesday had been fired along with his, and finally presents Lin as the Subut and asks if he was okay with her to share the same office. And finally the president says goodbye to his employees. The professor then asks what happened, since not only had it not been, but had also been prosecuted, and Lin simply replies that in fact the president had seen some potential in him. Once again appears the girl from before, rewarding him for achieving 60% of his career, and as a reward he ended up obtaining the Twin Towers. Sometime later received a call, exactly from the location of the Twin Towers, thus organizing a meeting with him so that he could review the property he had just acquired, as it now had many properties, needed to create a company to consolidate them all. The only thing he didn't realize, upon entering the room, the director was, by preparing himself in the office, and soon an employee will be, pushes our protagonist so that she could finish, but completely embarrassed too. At a celebration event or something like that, our protagonist was completely in character, and that's where it ends. Meeting with the divine lady, who possibly asked for only a minute, as it was not made of iron. Decided to go for a meal because I was very hungry. Suddenly a girl arrives wanting to add it in the social network, neighbor, but as Lin rejecting the girl decided to leave completely outraged with him. The protagonist then listened to the divine lady talking to some women at the place where a design company had earned 800 million for a major project that would employ, more specifically, the renewal of the ship terminal, and realizes that in fact the company the girls were talking about was the company he had hired to make the renewal in the port. A young man appears, then entering into a conversation with Moses. And after all, She was also interested in this great project that she would soon undertake. The young man offers him a deal by saying that if he wanted to take on this project, he could think of something, and our protagonist only observed the conversation in the background. Given that the young man had such an important position, she suggested that he go to her company so that they could talk, but he responded by saying that he simply could go to a dinner party to talk better about the matter. This only made our protagonist finally will take control of the situation, saying that the lady, Davina, did not have time to meet with someone like him. And then she finally responds, saying that he had recently scheduled an appointment with Lin. Therefore I would have to decline your invitation. The young man then said she was too, as I was missing an opportunity that was worth hundreds of millions. But as Lin was in total control over the project, said that the design project would not be given to him, as he knew another company that was more promising than his own. In the end, Lin ended up convincing the young man to call his cousin, who was the head of the design company. He also put the cell phone on so that everyone could hear. And when our protagonist introduces himself to talk to his cousin, the guy on the phone finally recognized his voice. The young man from before asks if his cousin knew Lin from somewhere, and he replies that in reality was the owner of the ship terminal, and the project had been presented to him precisely by Lin. When I saw that it was Lin who was in charge of everything, the young man begins to himself like everyone else for his rude attitude recently. And let's say that this time, our protagonist ended up accepting and letting it pass. Then tells the lady, Divine, that I would wait for her in the lobby, since I was very tired, and while I was going there, we see that the women were completely delighted with him. When Mai says she finally arrives at the place he mentioned, he was pretending to sleep on the couch, and soon we see the beautiful damsel approaching him calmly so as not to wake him up, but soon brings her closer to him. And all this time I was just pretending. The divine lady was surprised by Lin's attitude when purchasing the One terminal, especially because even while doing his job, Habitual was always investing in other businesses as well. At the end of this conversation she says that he could not disagree with him, and that he would everything possible to finish the terminal project with quality and quantity. However, he soon mentions, who never said he would give him the terminal project. Yet if I didn't, I would sleep on the sofa and would receive a small punishment from the lady, divine, and in the end it all ended in the best possible way, as we are seeing now. The next day, had gone to visit the Twin Towers precisely. And suddenly a girl appeared calling him. This girl's name was Mokin, one of Lin's classmates at the university. As the year went on, she asks him what he had been doing to earn a living, and he replies that he was now a teacher at university. The girl then starts to belittle her work a little bit, as he earned much more than he did, even though he was the class nerd in the past. Then she asks what I was doing, he more specifically there in the Twin Towers. And he responds, asking if she would believe him if he said he was there to get the apartment. In a moment he asks if there was anything wrong with his company, since there were so many people at the entrance. And she replies that the 7th tycoon, who bought the Twin Towers, will visit them that day to do the paperwork, so it's, and the other executives were there to receive him. Her boyfriend shows up, then asking him to follow him soon. Then introduces her boyfriend Alen, suggesting that the three of them set a day for dinner, and so her boyfriend could try to get her a job. However, the guy in front of him immediately refuses, as if that wasn't enough. He also says that the person, the one she wanted me to dine with, was not important, therefore it would be a complete waste of time. Eat with him, and soon she says goodbye to Lin with her boyfriend. Understand that I didn't even know who he was talking to, really even. Our protagonist was surprised by the lack of consideration of the young person before, while the people of that company was waiting precisely for our protagonist rest. Mentions that he had only purchased 2 of his buildings, but the reception was still too big. When the guy from before realizes that Lin was right at the beginning of his reception, the couple was impressed by their attitude and also outraged as they did not know who Lin really was. The girl then tries to talk to Lin, to tell him that the place was not for him. The president then asks what you were doing, and she replies that he was her former classmate, and therefore I was not quite right in the head. Her boyfriend also arrives calling to security to get rid of our protagonist, but ends up getting a good slap in the face, since in reality was precisely the one who bought the Twin Towers. Therefore, both of them had to pack up their things and leave that company immediately. The girl, not believing any of that, asks Lin if he had actually bought the towers, twins, and he replies that he had tried to tell you before, but she didn't believe it. After that, now her boyfriend would like to go on an evening date with Lin during dinner, however it was too late. After all, a few minutes earlier he said that Lin was not qualified to have dinner with him, and let's say that now the roles have simply been reversed. The president then asks him to ignore these people, and asks them to go to the meeting room. Once inside, I would have to sign a lot of papers that had already been signed, tired just of seeing so many things they had to sign. Half an hour later, our protagonist had finally finished the signings. And with that, the president congratulates him on his acquisition. Also asks if Lin had a suitable candidate for ownership, Since the tower's twins were now under his responsibility, the protagonist asks if the manager had someone in mind. After telling Lin, a potential candidate to be hired by Lin asks him to contact him and finally define the formalities. At that time, upon leaving the company, we see the pair of losers who have just been dismissed after do an excellent job irritating the owner of the place. The girl from before takes the opportunity to break up with the boy, whom her boyfriend so proudly called a short time ago, as she had said she wanted to marry him. He did not expect this, and she replies that Lin, I had written him a love letter in the past, and now she was going to be with him. Only then did he realize the kind of person she really was. In the end, it's all just a matter of money here, apparently. Except for the divine lady who acts different from this rattlesnake. Shortly thereafter, our protagonist finally appears, and the Anakin appears, lunging at him, saying that she had just broken up with her boyfriend. He asks what does that have to do with him. The girl replies that since he had written her a love letter in the past, I was now giving him a chance. Therefore it would be better if I took advantage of it. But apparently, the girl hit her head, since the person who had actually written that letter was a completely different one, and it hadn't been him. With that, the Anaconda ended up going through a great embarrassment, as several people there they begin to talk bad about her because of his despicable attitude. As our protagonist had nothing else to do there, Reddy said goodbye to the girl as she still had a lot to do. The rattlesnake getting into his car without permission, asking him to take her home, as she had just been fired. However, this ended up making him completely furious, since not even had given him permission to get into his car. We continue with the girl from before, insisting on staying in our protagonist's car, only because they had been classmates in the past. As she refused to get out of her car, he decided to call the police, and only then did she agree to leave the vehicle. After that, we see a scene of possibly a fight where, basically an unknown man demanded that Ms. Jin to give him compensation, as there was no need for him to do the whole scene, just because of what happened. She said she would pay for the repair. Like old man, thought she wouldn't have that much money. In order to pay for the repair of your car, thought of a second option so that this debt could pay herself. Basically she would need to be his grandmother, and with that he could gradually deduct from his salary to be able to pay for the repair of his car. However, upon hearing this, the young woman changed the tone of her voice, saying that the old bastard, the scoundrel from before, was dreaming too loudly, pulls a handkerchief out of his chest with some kind of substance, placing it directly into Miss Jin's nostrils. By inhaling what was on the fabric, she ended up getting dizzy. But for his sadness and joy, our protagonist suddenly arrives. When the beautiful young woman realizes that she had appeared, decides to run into his arms. He asked what had happened to his wrist, since it was red, and she replies that he was precisely the bastard from before, who wanted to knock her out at all costs. When Lin asks for more details about what actually happened, she mentions what the evil guy before had said. According to him, the wind threw his motorcycle on his car, and he began to demand that she pay for the repair. As Lin also had detective skills, began to think it was not so windy that day, so there was no way that his motorcycle had been shot down so easily, since there was a security camera filming everything you said. Lin said they would see in detail if everything the boy said, it was really true. This made the scoundrel perverse quickly changed his mind, saying that he himself would find a place to repair his car. Realizing that the man from before was in a hurry, our protagonist says that if something similar happened there, he would call the police. The guy quickly knelt when he heard what Lena had said, saying he had a family and small children, therefore asked him not to call the police. However, when the time came of trying to the beautiful young man to take her somewhere, apparently she didn't think much of her family, as Lin, I would been very kind that day, still trying to pass the incident, saying that next time, I would definitely send him to jail. With all this confusion, Miss Lin mentioning that he felt dizzy and he said he would soon take her home. Inside the car, he replied why she didn't buy a car for herself, as he was now a sales manager. She replies that for now it was not a good idea to do so since I had just received a promotion. He then tells her not to worry about what he was saying, people, and that any of these days, I would take her to a dealership to choose one for her. Here the lady, Jean, was having some hallucinations, probably because of the substance that had recently inhaled from the fabric, but does not pass long before she is offered as payment. Our protagonist for having recently helped her. Although the proposal was not so bad, Lin simply asked her not to be impulsive, as they would soon be arriving at your home. Upon arriving at the home of the beautiful young woman, it could already be seen that apparently did not have much time to tie up the house. Or was it just laziness? Despite all the mess, she quickly begins to order, apologizing for him. Witnessing that, Lin ends up mentioning that he was very hot, so while she was showering, he could sit and wait, and as soon as she finished, could eat something, and that's what he did, and decided to wait to invent a famous game that many are familiar with, but almost all of them. However, it is not long before she appears, asking him to see what's wrong with him, as his body was warm, and he was still dizzy. Usually where he lived, we call this fever, but apparently its problem was completely different. While resting a little in bed, he also does now live alone, and she reveals that she had recently divorced. So she lived alone, as the beautiful damsel had become too needy. Asked him to accompany her for a moment, and after a while he dies, and decided to keep him company. Even having a deity in support of him was still carried away for the time being. I think that after being betrayed, their trust in people was completely destroyed. After all this, wanted to know the reason why she divorced, and she says that from the moment in which her husband cheated on her, their relationship had already ended. Lin ends mentioning that I could not imagine that a man had the courage to betray such a beautiful woman alone. I think he forgot what he had just done with the lady, divining as she was no longer useful there, decided to leave, but she asked him to stay that night because it was too late, and it could be exhausting to drive, and he would leave the next morning. However, as I had to teach the next day and his home was a long way from the university, it was better to leave. Talking about the next day, early in the morning, noticed that something had happened to his desk. The disappearance of the director, then mentions that since he was now the deputy director, would need to stay in the same office as the director, his or her. However, according to him, he did not want to share a room with a tigress and asked for the nurse's help to bring the desk back. Speaking of the tigress, it doesn't take long to appear below. Not knowing where to hide Lin's face, even tried to disguise it by saying that she had heard wrong. Later that day he ended up receiving a call, saying that one of his students was going to jump of the building, which made her begin to despair. Quickly as he prepared to leave, he tells Lin and Grandma what they had just said. And apparently the student wanted to, jumping for something that happened at work. I didn't think it was a good idea. Go to the place alone. Decided to call our protagonist as well. Inside the car, Lin asks who is the girl who wanted to jump. And she mentions that the girl's name was Sun Xiaoyu, an exceptional student that year. After its internship she had rented an apartment, so the director didn't know much about what had happened. The Spanish, where she were. As that is what the director had said earlier. She said that the girl worked in the capital city. And as that name was familiar to him. Lin recalled that this was actually Kim Han's company. Does not take long to get to the place where everything was happening, and quickly realize that there was actually a person at the top of the building that intended to jump, and soon we see a beautiful pink-haired girl about to jump at any moment. The director, seeing this, decided to enter, and although the police officer said they could not, she said they were the girl's teachers. Therefore they could help, trying to talk to her, and the police officer was allowing them to enter the site.